The walk had taken 31 minutes. Harold had counted. Counting was something he did now. Counting was the language of the shed. He counted the cans on the shelf, counted the crackers in the sleeve, counted the seconds between the truck starting and the engine sound fading, counted the minutes of light that came through the cracks in the plywood, counted the days between Travis bringing groceries, counted everything because counting was control and control was the only thing he had left. He had left the shed at 3:12, had worked the latch for the third time that week, the brass screws giving a little more, each day the butter knife wearing a groove into the soft metal, the way water wears a groove into stone. Not with force, with patience, with the relentless daily unremarkable persistence of a man who has nothing but time and a tool and the absolute refusal to accept that the door cannot be opened. The first time he had tried the latch was 3 months ago. He had broken the tip of the butter knife and had to reshape it on the concrete floor, grinding the metal back and forth in long, slow strokes until a new edge formed. The second time was 2 months ago. He had gotten 2 of the 3 screws loose before Travis came home early, and Harold had to push them back in with his thumb and pretend nothing had happened. The third time was this morning, and all 3 screws gave. The latch plate came free. The door opened from the inside for the first time in 6 months. Harold had stood in the doorway of the shed and looked at the backyard and the house and the sky and the desert beyond the fence, and he had felt something that he had not felt in so long he had almost forgotten its name. Possibility. The feeling that the next minute could be different from the last one. That the world beyond the door was not a memory or a dream, but a real place that he could walk into with his real legs and his real body and his real mind that had never been confused, not for one single moment in the last 2 years, no matter what the paperwork said. He had walked out of the yard through the gap in the fence that he had noted in his notebook on May 15th, had crossed the vacant lot behind the property, had reached the road, had turned south toward the highway because south was where the diner was, and the diner was where people were, and people were what he needed. Not a specific person, not a savior, just a person, just one human being who would look at him and see a man and say, yes, you can sit here. That was all he needed. One yes after 2 years of silence. The 1.5 miles had felt like 10. His knee had protested every step with the grinding, burning, bone-on-bone friction that made his eyes water and his jaw clench and his hands grip whatever was nearest a fence post, a mailbox, the trunk of a Palo Verde tree, anything solid, anything that would hold him up while the pain rolled through him like a wave and receded enough to let him take the next step. But he had walked, because walking was the only thing left between Harold Pemberton and disappearing. Between the man who had carved "I am still here" into a wall and the man who would become another Clarence Munn, another name on a death certificate that said natural causes, another old man who died quietly because nobody pulled out a chair. Harold Pemberton pushed the glass door open with both hands because one hand was not enough anymore. The bell above the door jingled and the sound hit him like a gunshot. He stopped, held his breath, listened, waited for a voice behind him to shout his name, waited for a hand to grab his collar and drag him back down that gravel road and into the dark. Nothing. Just the hum of a ceiling fan spinning lazy circles above a room full of strangers, and the low clatter of forks against plates, and a country song playing so softly it might as well have been a memory. He let the door close behind him and took his first step inside Rosie's griddle. His right knee buckled. Not all the way, just enough to remind him that it owned him now. The arthritis had been grinding through that joint for 3 years, bone against bone, and Travis had made sure he never saw a doctor for it. Travis had made sure of a lot of things. Harold gripped the edge of the hostess stand and steadied himself. His fingers were shaking, not from the pain, from something worse, from the knowledge that he had exactly 90 minutes before Travis came home from work, walked around the back of the house, checked the shed, and found it empty. 90 minutes. That was what freedom looked like at 74 years old. A clock running backward. He scanned the room, booths along the windows where the afternoon light cut through dusty blinds in long yellow slashes. Tables scattered across a tile floor that had seen better decades. A counter with red vinyl stools where a man in a trucker cap was working through a plate of meatloaf like it owed him money. A mother in the corner booth with 2 kids, one of them drawing on a placemat with a crayon that had been worn down to a nub. A waitress with a blonde ponytail refilling coffee with the mechanical grace of someone who had poured 10,000 cups and would pour 10,000 more. Normal. All of it. Ordinary people living ordinary lives in an ordinary diner off an ordinary highway in Tucson, Arizona. And Harold Pemberton standing among them like a ghost who had wandered out of his own grave and wasn't sure yet if anyone could see him. He had not been inside a restaurant in 2 years, had not sat across from another human being and shared a meal since Dorothy died. Dorothy, who had made pot roast every Sunday without fail for 41 years. Dorothy, who had called him Harry in a voice that made the nickname sound like something precious, something worth protecting. Dorothy, who had died in her sleep one Tuesday night in April, while Harold lay beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and woke to a silence so complete it had a sound of its own. Within 3 weeks of the funeral, their grandson Travis had moved in. To help. That was the word Travis used. Help. He said it with such sincerity, such warmth, such convincing tenderness, that even Harold had believed it at first. The neighbors believed it. The pastor believed it. The friends from the VFW believed it. Everyone believed it because Travis Whitmore had a face that was built for believing. Clean-cut, square-jawed, 35 years old, with the kind of steady blue eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Help. Harold had learned what that word really meant on a Tuesday in March 18 months ago when Travis grabbed his arm for the first time, grabbed it hard enough to leave a mark above the elbow. Harold had asked for his checkbook back. That was all. Just asked for what was his. And Travis had grabbed him and leaned in close and said 5 words that Harold would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. Who's going to believe you? Harold approached the first table. 2 men mid-50s baseball caps faded by sun and sweat plates half-cleared coffee still steaming. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough not to crowd. He had rehearsed this in the shed, had practiced the words in a whisper while Travis's truck idled in the driveway at 7:15 every morning. Mind if I join you? His voice came out thin, cracked at the edges like a door hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. The first man glanced at his buddy, a look passed between them, the kind of look people share when they have already decided and need only confirm it with each other. The kind of look that says, this is someone else's problem. Sorry, pal. We're just finishing up. They were not finishing up. Their coffee was full. Their plates still had food on them. Harold could see the lie as clearly as he could see their faces, but he nodded. Of course. Sorry to bother you. He moved to the next table. His knees screamed. He gripped the back of a chair to keep himself upright and waited for the pain to pass. A woman 40-something reading a paperback with a cracked spine. She looked kind. Harold thought she looked like someone who might say yes. Someone who might see past the limp and the wrong button shirt and the belt that had been cinched so tight the leather had buckled because he had lost so much weight. Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. Would it be all right if I sat here for a few minutes? I won't be any trouble. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that had the word no already built into it before her mouth even opened. I'm actually waiting for someone. Sorry. She was not waiting for anyone. Her purse was on the chair across from her. A person waiting for someone does not put their purse on the other seat. Harold knew this. He had been an engineer for 33 years. He noticed things. He calculated loads and stresses and tolerances. He read the math behind things other people took at face value. And right now, the math said this woman had looked at him and decided that whatever he was carrying was too heavy for her afternoon. No problem at all. Third table, a young couple sharing a plate of fries. The man looked up and shook his head before Harold even got the full sentence out. We're good, man. 2 words. A wall made of air. Fourth table. An older woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a crossword puzzle folded in front of her. She looked at Harold's limp, looked at his belt, looked at his shirt, the buttons misaligned so the collar sat crooked against his throat. Her eyes filled with something that might have been pity, but pity does not pull out a chair. Pity looks and feels and turns away. I'm sorry, honey. I've got my things spread out here. She had a napkin and a glass of water. Fifth table, a man eating alone. Harold felt a surge of hope so fierce it hurt. A man eating alone might understand what it meant to want company, might understand the particular loneliness of sitting in a room full of people and belonging to none of them. Excuse me, sir? Mind if I taken? One word. The man did not even look up from his phone. His thumb kept scrolling. Harold stood there for 3 seconds, maybe four long enough to feel the full weight of a single syllable. Sixth table. His knee was grinding now. Each step sent a bolt of white fire from his kneecap to his hip. He was leaning on chair backs like crutches, pulling himself across the diner, one table at a time, leaving a trail of rattled chairs and averted eyes behind him. A couple in their 60s, close to his age. Close enough that they should have recognized something in him, some echo of their own future, some reflection of what time does to a man when the wrong person gets hold of him. The woman looked at her husband. The husband looked at Harold. We're about to leave. They had just gotten their food. Steam was still rising from the plates. Seventh table. A man sitting by himself near the window. One chair, one person, one cup of coffee. Harold stopped in front of him. The man held up his hand before Harold could speak. Sorry, buddy. Full up, full up. One man at a table for two. Full up. He felt the weight of every step between that table and the next. Each one a decision. Each one a gamble. Because every time he approached a table, he was betting what little hope he had left on the chance that this person, this stranger, this random human being eating lunch on a Friday afternoon, would look at him and see something worth saying yes to. And every time they said no, the bet got bigger and the hope got smaller and the distance between tables got longer, even though the actual distance hadn't changed at all. It was the emotional distance that was growing. The gap between the man he was and the man they saw. Between Harold Pemberton, bridge, engineer, husband trivia, champion, the man who could calculate load-bearing tolerances in his head and finish a crossword in 9 minutes, and the old man with the limp and the wrong shirt who was bothering people during their lunch. That gap was killing him. Not literally, not yet, but in the way that being unseen kills a person, slowly, from the inside. The way a bridge dies when the bolts rust and the cables weaken and the load exceeds the design and nobody notices because the bridge still looks fine from the outside. It still stands. It still carries traffic. It still spans the river. But inside, in the hidden places where the steel meets the concrete and the tension lives, something is giving way. Something is failing. And by the time anyone notices, it's too late. The bridge doesn't sauce. It doesn't warn. It falls. Harold was falling, had been falling for 2 years. And nobody had noticed because he still stood. He still breathed. He still sat on his cot and ate his half can of beans and answered Travis's morning question with a shake of his head and looked at from the outside like a man who was declining quietly and naturally the way old men are expected to decline. The way the world wants old men to decline. Quietly, without fuss, without making anyone uncomfortable. Harold Pemberton stood in the middle of Rosie's griddle. The room stretched around him in every direction, and every direction was closed. 7 tables, 7 refusals. Not one of them cruel. That was the worst part. That was the thing that cracked him. Nobody had been mean. Nobody had raised a voice or told him to get out or called him names. They had simply decided quietly, efficiently, without malice, without even the dignity of honest cruelty, that he was not their concern. And standing there 74 years old with a bad knee and a stolen life and 83 minutes left on a clock that only he could hear, Harold Pemberton felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart, something older than that, something that had been holding since Dorothy died. Dorothy had been a kindergarten teacher for 28 years at Pueblo Gardens Elementary. 28 years of small hands and spilled paint and shoes tied and tears dried, and the particular kind of patience that comes from loving children who are not your own and treating them as if they were. She retired in 2008, and Harold had thrown her a party in the backyard, strung lights in the mesquite tree, invited half the neighborhood and half the VFW post, and anyone who had ever shared a table with Dorothy Pemberton, and walked away feeling like the world was a slightly better place than they had previously believed. Dorothy had cried at that party not because she was shunned, but because she was loved, and sometimes being loved is harder to accept than being alone, because love is a mirror, and in that mirror you see yourself the way others see you. And sometimes that reflection is more than you think you deserve. She had squeezed Harold's hand that night under the mesquite tree with the light strung through the branches like low-hanging stars and said, "Harry, when you retire, I want us to drive the whole coast. All of it, top to bottom, every lighthouse, every clam shack, every single sunset from Maine to Key West. I want to eat lobster in places where they don't even have menus. I want to stand at the edge of the Atlantic and feel small. They never made the trip. Harold retired 2 years later, and then Dorothy's hip went bad, and then his knees started grinding, and then there were doctor's appointments and physical therapy sessions, and the so incremental surrender of plans to the reality of aging bodies. Time did what time does to plans. It turned them into memories of things that never happened. The worst kind of memories. The ones that ache not because of what was lost, but because of what was never had. Harold kept a folder in his desk drawer with printouts of lighthouses along the eastern seaboard. He had circled 7 of them with a red pen. Dorothy never knew about the folder. He was going to surprise her. He was going to book the trip for their 42nd anniversary. He was going to hand her the folder at breakfast and watch her face change from confusion to understanding to that particular kind of joy that Dorothy expressed with her whole body, her shoulders rising and her hands coming together and her eyes going wide and bright. The folder was still in the drawer. Harold had not opened it since she died. But he knew it was there. He knew it the way he knew the 5 words carved into the wall of the shed. Some things you carry not because you want to, but because putting them down would mean admitting they are lost. And Harold was not ready to admit that. Not about the trip, not about Dorothy, not about any of it. The funeral was a Thursday. 214 people came. Dorothy had been loved by the kind of quiet, consistent love that doesn't make headlines but fills church pews and funeral homes and the memories of everyone she touched. The casseroles started arriving that afternoon, enough to feed Harold for a month. He ate none of them. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at the chair where Dorothy used to sit, and he forgot what hunger was, because hunger is a small thing compared to emptiness. The house was full of flowers and full of silence and full of the particular hollowness that comes when the person who made a house a home is no longer in it, and every room echoes with the absence of footsteps and the absence of humming and the absence of a voice that said Harry the way no other voice has ever said it or ever will. Since the first time Travis grabbed his arm, since the first night in the shed when the padlock clicked and the dark came down like a lid on a coffin. Hope. What cracked was hope. He almost turned around, almost walked back out through that glass door with the jingling bell, and limped that 1.5 miles back to the property and worked the latch with his butter knife and crawled back onto the cot and pulled the thin blanket over his shoulders and let the lock click behind him and disappeared. The way old men disappear in this country, quietly, without fuss, without anyone noticing until the mail stacks up and the smell starts and someone finally thinks to check. Almost. But then his eyes found the back corner. The table sat against the wall where the overhead light had burned out months ago. Maybe longer. Nobody had replaced it. Nobody wanted to sit back there anyway. The shadow lay across the table like a blanket thrown over something the diner didn't want people to see. A man sat there alone, broad shoulders that stretched a plain black t-shirt to its limits, mid-40s, sunburned skin the color of old leather. Dark blonde hair pulled back and tied off with a band that looked like it had been there for days. A jaw that had been broken at least once and set by someone who did not care much about symmetry. Arms that told stories his mouth would never tell, scarred and thick, and resting on the table like slabs of something industrial. And over the t-shirt, a leather vest, worn, faded, road-beaten, the kind of vest that has crossed state lines and county lines, and the kinds of lines that don't appear on maps. The back patch was visible even in the bad light. 2 words that made people cross the street and lock their car doors and suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be. Hell's Angels. The rocker underneath read Arizona. Harold stared at that patch. His feet stopped moving. Every reflex, every survival instinct he had built over 74 years of keeping his head down and staying out of trouble and minding his own business, all of it fired at once. All of it said the same thing. Walk away. A man wearing that patch is not someone you approach. Not in a diner. Not anywhere. You do not sit at his table. You do not ask him for anything. You keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut, and you thank God he did not notice you. Harold knew this, knew it the way he knew gravity, the way he knew that steel bends before it breaks, that load-bearing tolerances are not suggestions, that bridges fall when people ignore the math. But Harold was out of tables, and he was out of time. He looked back at the door. 79 minutes now, maybe less. And outside that door was a mile and a half of desert road leading back to a shed with a padlock and a cot and a bucket in the corner and 4 cans of soup on a shelf that was getting emptier every week. And a man who would check that shed in a little over an hour and find it empty, and then the searching would start and the finding would follow. And what came after the finding was something Harold could not survive again. He looked at the biker. The biker had not moved, was holding a black coffee, no cream, no sugar, staring at the far wall with the kind of stillness that only comes from a man who is comfortable being alone with whatever lives inside his own head. Not looking at anything, not looking at Harold, not looking at the room full of people who kept glancing toward his table and then glancing away the way you glance at something that frightens you and then pretend you didn't. Harold took a step. His knee buckled. He caught himself on the back of an empty chair and stood there breathing until the white flash behind his eyes faded. Another step. The limp turned each footfall into a collision. Heel striking tile. The sound carrying through the quiet diner like a slow drumbeat. A dead man walking toward the one table everyone else avoided. He crossed the floor, past the tables that had said no, past the people who had decided he was not their problem, past the counter where the waitress watched him with her coffee pot frozen in mid-pour and her mouth slightly open, past the mother in the corner who pulled her children a little closer without realizing she was doing it. He stopped at the edge of the shadow. The biker's name was Garrett Slade, but Harold did not know that yet. All Harold knew was the patch on the vest and the size of the man wearing it, and the fact that this was either the bravest thing he had ever done or the last thing he would ever do. He cleared his throat. The sound came out like gravel in a tin can. "Mind if I join you?" Garrett Slade did not look up. Not immediately. He held his mug, let the silence sit. 3 seconds, by 7. Long enough for Harold to feel every set of eyes in the diner pressing against his back like hands trying to push him away from the edge of something he was about to fall off. Then Garrett looked at him. Not through him, not past him, not at the limp or the bad shirt or the belt that had run out of holes 3 notches ago. He looked at Harold Pemberton the way a man looks at something when he wants to understand it before he responds to it. His eyes moved to Harold's wrists. Both of them, yellow bruising, circular, worse on the right. Grip marks, not from a fall, not from an accident, from restraint. Someone had held this man down. Recently, more than once. His eyes moved to Harold's face. The hollowed cheeks, the skin pulled too tight across the bones. Not sick, starved, slowly, deliberately. The way you starve someone when you want them weak but alive. When you need them breathing but not strong enough to fight back. His eyes moved to Harold's eyes. And that was where Garrett stopped. Because what he saw there, he had seen before in shelters, in back rooms, in the faces of people who had been caged so long they had forgotten what open ground looked like. Fear, not the sharp kind. Not the kind that comes and goes with a loud noise or a dark alley. The deep kind. The kind that lives in your muscles and your bones and rewires your nervous system until you cannot take a bite of food without listening for footsteps. The kind that makes your shoulders climb toward your ears and your hands curl into fists even when there is nothing to fight. The kind that turns a man into a dog that flinches when you reach for it. Garrett Slade had buried friends. He had sat in federal interrogation rooms and given nothing but his name and his date of birth, in a silence so total it had driven agents to shouting. He had ridden through dust storms on I-10 that stripped paint off gas tanks and left the road invisible for miles. He had done things that would make the people in this diner lock their doors and drive to a different county. But he had also held a brother's kid at a funeral because nobody else would step up, and the boy was 4 years old and didn't understand why his father wasn't coming back. He had pulled over on a highway outside Isla Bend in 114-degree heat because a woman was trying to change a tire with a baby screaming in the back seat. He had sat in hospital rooms with dying men and stayed until the machines went flat because he believed that no one should cross alone. He had grown up in Prescott, son of a mechanic who drank too much, and a mother who left when Garrett was 9. The mechanic raised him with tools and silence and the occasional backhand that Garrett learned to dodge by the time he was 12. Not because his father was evil, because his father was broken. because the bottle had gotten into the places where the love was supposed to be and filled them with something that looked like anger, but was really just grief wearing a mask. Garrett's father had lost a brother in a logging accident when he was 22 and had never found a way to put that grief down, and so he carried it in his fists, in his voice, and the distance he kept between himself and everyone who tried to get close. Garrett left at 17, found the club at 20, found a family that didn't require blood, that required only loyalty and the willingness to ride, in the understanding that the road is the only church that never closes. He had spent 25 years in that family, had earned every patch and every scar and every story that the vest carried, had done things that would horrify the people sitting in this diner, had also done things that would humble them. Because the world is not divided into good men and bad men. The world is divided into men who act and men who don't. And Garrett Slade, for all his flaws, for all the lines he had crossed, and the laws he had broken, and the rooms he had walked into and out of with blood on his knuckles, was a man who acted. When he saw something wrong, he moved toward it, not away. That was the difference. That was the only difference that mattered. The world saw the patch. Garrett saw what was underneath. And right now, underneath the trembling and the limp and the shirt button wrong underneath, 74 years and a bad knee and a voice that barely worked, he saw a man who had walked into this diner as a last resort. A man who had been turned away by every table in the room and kept walking. A man who had come to the one place nobody in their right mind would come, the dark corner of the Hell's Angels table, because he had nowhere else left. Garrett set his coffee down. He stood up. Not fast, not aggressive, slow, deliberate. The way a man stands when he wants the room to see exactly what he is doing and exactly why. He reached across the table, gripped the empty chair, pulled it back, angled it slightly. Just enough so that a man with a bad right knee would not have to twist to sit down. Sit. One word. No warmth in it. No hostility. No performance. Just a fact. Like gravity. Like a bridge that holds because someone did the math. The diner went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that happens when every person in a room realizes at the same instant that they are watching something they will not forget. The trucker at the counter put his fork down. The mother in the corner looked up from her children. The waitress set the coffee pot on the counter and did not pick it up again. 7 tables had said no. 7 tables had looked at an old man with a limp and a wrong-button shirt and decided he was not worth the inconvenience of sharing their afternoon. And the Hells Angels biker in the back corner of the man. Nobody would sit near the man. The entire room, kept at arm's length, had pulled out a chair. Harold sat down slowly, carefully, lowering himself into the seat the way you lower yourself into water when you are not sure the ground underneath is solid. His right knee cracked loud enough to carry across the room. His hands gripped the edge of the table. His shoulders, the shoulders that had been locked up around his ears since he walked through the door, dropped. Half an inch, maybe less, but enough to breathe. Garrett sat back down. He raised one finger toward the waitress without looking away from Harold. She came over fast, faster than she had come to any table in the last hour, as if the raised finger of the man in the leather vest had more authority than the hostess stand and the kitchen bell and every table number in the building combined. Eggs, Garrett said. Scrambled. Bacon. Toast. Coffee. Orange juice. The waitress looked at Harold. Harold shook his head. The motion was small, almost imperceptible. I can't pay for that. I don't have any money. He took Garrett, cut him off. Not with words, with a look. The kind of look that said, the food is coming, you are going to eat it, and we are not going to have a conversation about it. The kind of look that closed a subject the way a vault door closes a vault. Harold closed his mouth. The food arrived in 6 minutes. The plate sat in front of him steaming. Eggs piled high, yellow and soft. 4 strips of bacon crisp, glistening. 2 slices of toast already buttered, the butter melting into the bread in golden pools. A glass of orange juice sweating in the heat. A fresh cup of coffee, black steam curling off the surface. Harold stared at the plate. He did not pick up the fork. Garrett watched him, didn't push, didn't ask what was wrong. He already knew what was wrong. A man who has been rationed, who has eaten half a can of cold beans and called it dinner, who has counted crackers and divided them across days and lain on a cot at night, with his stomach eating itself because the shelf was getting emptier And the grocery bags Travis brought to the house never included anything for the shed. That man does not simply pick up a fork when food appears in front of him. He checks first, checks the room, checks the door, checks the exits, checks it to make sure nobody is going to take the plate away, checks to make sure this is not a test, not a trick, not another thing that will be given and then snatched back the way everything in his life had been snatched back for the last 2 years. Harold checked the door, then the window, then the door again. Then he picked up the fork. The first bite of the eggs was almost too much. Not because of the taste, though. The taste was overwhelming after 2 years of canned soup and crackers and the occasional can of beans. That was all Travis allowed to reach the shelf in the shed. But because of what the bite represented, the bite was an act of trust. The bite said, I am going to put this food in my mouth and chew it and swallow it, and I am going to believe that it will not be taken from me, that this plate will not be snatched away, that this table will not be cleared, that this man sitting across from me will not suddenly change his mind and stand up and walk away and leave me here with an empty plate and the knowledge that even the biker in the back corner couldn't tolerate my company for more than 5 minutes. Harold chewed, swallowed. The eggs were warm and soft and salted just right, and they went down his throat and into his stomach, and his stomach, which had been running on empty for so long it had forgotten what full felt like, responded with a kind of gratitude that was almost painful, like blood returning to a limb that has been asleep. The tingling, the burning, the slow restoration of feeling into a place that had gone numb. He ate the second bite faster, and the third, and by the fourth bite he had found a rhythm slow but steady, the rhythm of a man who is remembering how to eat, the way a man who has been bedridden remembers how to walk. One step at a time, one bite at a time, one moment of trust at a time. The bacon was crisp, and the fat was rendered to a deep amber, and the salt hit his tongue like a small explosion, and he closed his eyes for a moment because he hadn't tasted salt like that in months. The soup was never salted. The beans were never salted. Travis didn't bother with seasonings for the shed. Why would you season food for a man you were trying to break? Seasoning implies care. Seasoning implies that the person eating the food matters enough to warrant flavor. And Travis had spent 2 years making sure Harold knew he didn't matter. But this bacon mattered. This toast mattered. This orange juice, cold and tart and sweet, all at once held in a glass with both hands. Because one hand alone shook too badly. This orange juice mattered. Everything on this plate was a refutation of every meal Harold had eaten in the shed. Every cold can of soup. Every counted cracker. Every night lying on the cot with his stomach eating itself and his mind replaying the meals Dorothy used to make. The pot roast, the mashed potatoes, the green beans from the garden, the apple pie that she made every Thanksgiving with a lattice crust that took her 45 minutes to weave because she insisted each strip of dough be exactly the same width. Precision. Dorothy believed in precision in her pies the way Harold believed in precision in his bridges. They were the same that way, built for accuracy, built to hold. He ate slowly, small bites, chewing carefully, swallowing like each mouthful was a decision that could be reversed. He ate the eggs first, then the toast, then the bacon one strip at a time, holding each strip between his fingers and biting into it with the cautious deliberation of a man who has learned that food is not guaranteed. He drank the orange juice in small sips, holding the glass with both hands, because one hand alone shook too badly to keep it steady. Garrett sipped his coffee and said nothing. He let the man eat. Let him have this. A meal, a chair, a table where nobody was watching him with suspicion or pity or impatience. A table where he was allowed to exist without explaining himself. 7 minutes passed. Harold finished the plate, every bite. He set the fork down and pressed his palms flat on the table, the way he used to press them flat on his drafting desk when he had finished a specification and wanted to feel the solidity of the surface beneath his work. His eyes were wet, not crying, not yet, just wet, the way a dam looks right before it gives. I shouldn't be here, Harold said. Garrett set his mug down. But you are, he'll know. When he gets home and checks the shed, he'll know I got out. He'll come looking. Who, my grandson? Travis. Garrett's expression did not change. His face was built of stone and scar tissue and the kind of stillness that comes from years of training yourself to give nothing away. But something behind his eyes shifted, a gear turning, a calculation being made. Your grandson locks you in a shed. Harold's hands trembled against the table. The bruises on his wrists pulsed yellow against his skin. It's not, he calls it the guest house. That's what he tells people. Converted garden shed. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor, giving me my own space, independence. But there's a padlock on the outside, a cot, a bucket. His voice dropped. The windows are boarded shut from the outside. I haven't seen out of those windows in 6 months. The only light I get comes through the cracks in the plywood when the sun is at the right angle. 3 minutes in the morning, 5 in the afternoon. That's how I know what time it is. By the light coming through the cracks. How long? 2 years. Since Dorothy died, she was my wife. 41 years. She passed in her sleep one night in April, and 3 weeks later, Travis moved in. Said he wanted to help. Said he was worried about me being alone. And the bruises on your wrists. Harold looked down at them. The yellow circles, the fingerprint pattern. 4 marks on the top of each wrist, 1 on the underside. The geometry of a hand that has gripped and held and squeezed until the capillaries burst. He did not try to explain them away. He did not say he fell. He did not say it was nothing. He grabs me when I argue. When I say the money is mine. When I say I want to see a doctor. When I ask about my car keys or my phone or my identification. He grabs me and he says, Harold stopped, swallowed. The muscles in his throat worked against something that didn't want to go down. He says, who's going to believe you, old man? You don't even know what day it is. Harold's eyes burned. He looked at Garrett with a gaze that had no fear in it, no shame, just a ferocity that came from somewhere deep from the place where a man stores the truth about himself when the world is trying to rewrite it. Do you know what day it is? It's Friday, June 14th. The temperature outside is 104 degrees. I worked 33 years as a bridge engineer for the state of Arizona. I can still calculate load-bearing tolerances in my head. I finished the crossword in the Tucson Star this morning in 9 minutes. I know exactly where I am, what day it is, and what I had for dinner 3 nights ago, which was half a can of beans because that was what was left. He paused, drew a breath that shuddered on the way in and steadied on the way out. I am not confused. He tells people I am confused. There is a difference. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Full of everything Harold had not been allowed to say for 2 years. Full of every time he had tried to tell someone and been dismissed, redirected, patted on the hand like a child who had said something embarrassing at a dinner party. Full of every morning he had sat on that cot and spoken the truth to a wall and heard nothing come back. Garrett leaned forward, his forearms on the table, his voice low enough that nobody beyond this table could hear it. What did he take from you? The dam broke. Everything. Harold told him everything. The money first. Travis started with the bills, said Harold was forgetting to pay them. Harold had been paying his own bills since 1971, had never missed a payment on anything in 53 years. Not a mortgage, not a utility, not a credit card. But Travis called the bank, told them a story about a declining grandfather got himself added to the accounts. Then the withdrawals started. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, 15,000 in one transaction 4 months ago. The numbers climbing month after month while Harold sat in a shed and counted cans. Then the car. Travis took the keys, said Harold was a danger on the road. Harold had a clean driving record for 56 years. No accidents, no tickets, no points. Then the phone. Travis canceled the line, said Harold didn't need it, said he could use Travis's phone if he needed to call anyone. But Travis's phone was always in Travis's pocket, always out of reach, always behind a locked door or in a truck that was driving away. Then the identification, driver's license, social security card, insurance cards, all of it gone from the drawer where Harold had kept them for decades. Travis said he put them somewhere safe. Harold never saw them again. Then the people. The neighbors stopped coming. The pastor stopped visiting. The friends from the VFW stopped calling. Because Travis told them all the same story. The same words, the same carefully constructed performance, delivered with the same expression of quiet, heroic grief. Grandpa's having episodes. He's declining. It's hard to watch. We're doing our best. And one by one, the world believed him. Because Travis was young and polite and clean-cut and articulate, and Harold was old. And in this country, when a young voice and an old voice tell different stories, the world believes the younger one. Every time. Without question, without hesitation, without even knowing it's making a choice. Then came the doctor, a woman named Hargrove, Dr. Judith Hargrove. She came to the house. Travis was in the room the whole time. She asked Harold questions. Simple questions. What year is it? Who is the president count backward from 100 by sevens? Harold answered everyone correctly. Did not hesitate, did not stumble, did not guess. She diagnosed him with moderate to severe cognitive decline. She wrote it down right there in the kitchen, on official letterhead, with the date and her signature and a recommendation for full-time supervised care. Right in front of me, Harold said. His voice was barely above a whisper now. She wrote it while I was sitting right there. And I said, that's not true. I answered everything right, every single question. And she looked at Travis, not at me. She looked at Travis and she said, this is very common. They don't recognize the decline. And Travis nodded. And that was it. That piece of paper made me invisible. Garrett's jaw tightened. A muscle near his temple twitched once. He was quiet for 10 seconds. What about the insurance, life insurance? $480,000. The beneficiary was the VFW post in Tucson. Dorothy and I set that up years ago. We wanted it to go to the veterans. That was important to us. Travis changed it to his name. I found the paperwork in the kitchen trash under coffee grounds. Like he wanted to hide it but didn't think I'd look. But you looked, Harold's eyes sharpened. I always look. That's what he never understood. He thinks I'm broken. He tells everyone I'm broken. But I am not broken. Harold leaned in. His voice dropped to a whisper. I have a storage unit. Rented it 8 months ago. Paid cash from money I hid inside a boot in the back of the shed. Travis doesn't know it exists. Inside that unit is everything. Bank statements showing every withdrawal. The insurance paperwork with the forged signature. The medical records from Hargrove. And a notebook. What kind of notebook? Spiral bound. Blue cover. Every page filled. Dates. Amounts. What he said. What he did. When the lock went on the door. When the food stopped. When he grabbed me. When the doctor came. Everything. He paused. His voice steadied. The first page says if anything happens to me, this is why. Harold reached into his pocket. His fingers were shaking so badly it took him 3 tries. He pulled out a small brass key and slid it across the table. The metal caught what little light reached the back corner and threw a small, bright flash across the surface between them. Unit 19, Desert Ridge Storage. Off the frontage road past the truck stop. Garrett looked at the key. He did not touch it. Not yet. If something happens to me, Harold said, somebody needs to know that unit exists. Somebody who won't ignore it. Somebody who won't be afraid of him. Why me? Harold looked at the Hells Angels patch, then back at Garrett's face. Because 7 people in this room said no, and you pulled out a chair. He paused. Let that settle. A man who does that isn't the man most people think he is. Garrett picked up the key. He held it in his palm, closed his fingers around it. He could feel the weight of it, not the brass. The brass was nothing. What weighed was what it carried, a man's entire life. Everything that had been stolen, everything that had been silenced, everything that had been locked behind a door that only opened from the outside. He put the key in his vest pocket, against his chest, where it pressed against his ribs through the leather. You have to go back, Garrett said. Harold's face crumpled. Just for a second, a flash of something so raw and unguarded that it was almost impossible to look at. The face of a man who had just been told the one thing he already knew and hoped with every cell in his body he wouldn't hear. Then he pulled it together. Rebuilt the wall, set his jaw. I know, not because you belong there, because if you don't go back, he'll know something changed. Right now, the only advantage you have is that he thinks you're broken, that he thinks you're finished, that he thinks you don't have anything left. Garrett leaned forward. Let him keep thinking that. How long? Not long. I need a few days. I need to get the right people looking at what's in that unit. If we move too fast, if he finds out someone's seen the evidence, he'll destroy what he can and move you somewhere I can't reach, a facility, another state. He'll lawyer up and control the story, and by the time anyone listens, the notebook is gone and you're a confused old man in a ward somewhere, and he's free. Harold was quiet for a long time, a few days. He repeated it the way a man repeats a prison sentence being handed down by a judge. A few more days in the shed. Can you hold? Harold looked at his hands, the bruised wrists, the shaking fingers. The knuckles that had once gripped drafting pencils and steering wheels, and his wife's hand in the dark, and now gripped the edge of a table in a diner because gripping was all they had left. He pressed his palms flat against the surface until the trembling stopped. I've held for 2 years. I can hold a few more days. He stood. The knee cracked. He gripped the table edge and pulled himself upright and stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, looking at Garrett Slade, a man he had known for 45 minutes, a stranger with a leather vest and scars on his arms and a coffee mug in a dark corner and a chair that he had pulled out for no reason other than that someone needed to sit down. You did the right thing walking in here today, Garrett said. Harold's eyes filled. The dam right at the edge. I almost didn't. But you did. But I did. Harold turned. He limped across the diner floor, past the 7 tables, past the people who had said no, past the waitress who held the door open for him with an expression on her face that she would carry home that night, and sat on the kitchen counter and stare at while she ate her dinner in silence, and thought about what it means to watch a moment that changes you and not understand until later how much. The bell jingled as he stepped out into the heat. The Arizona sun hit him like a wall, 104 degrees of relentless, honest, brutal light, and every single person in that diner watched him go. Garrett sat alone at the back table. He held his coffee, the key pressed against his chest through the vest pocket. He stared at the empty chair across from him, the one he had pulled out for a stranger, the one that was still angled slightly for a bad right knee. He stared at it for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice. Boone, I need you and Virgil at the shop tonight. 9 o'clock. A pause on the other end. The sound of a man shifting his weight. Then Boone Driscoll's voice, low and rumbling, the kind of voice that comes from a chest cavity, the size of a 50-gallon drum. What's going on? Garrett looked at the empty chair one more time. Someone asked me for help, and I said yes. He hung up, set the phone on the table, picked up his coffee and drank the last of it. Cold now, bitter. He didn't care. Outside, Harold Pemberton was already 100 yards down the road, limping, his right knee screaming with every step, his shirt dark with sweat, his shadow stretching out behind him on the asphalt like a long, thin thing trying to pull him back toward the diner, toward the chair, toward the one place in 2 years where someone had looked at him and seen a man instead of a problem. But he kept walking, toward the shed, toward the padlock, toward the cot and the bucket and the 4 cans of soup in the plywood darkness. Because that was where he needed to be. For now. For a few more days. For however long it took. He had been holding for 2 years. He had carved 5 words into a wall with a nail. He had kept a notebook. He had rented a storage unit. He had worked a latch with a butter knife. He had walked 1.5 miles on a knee that should have put him on the ground and asked a question that 7 people refused to answer, and 1 person answered with a single word in a chair. He could hold a few more days. The walk back took 37 minutes, longer than the walk there because his knee had stiffened during the time he sat at Garrett's table, and the adrenaline that had carried him to the diner had drained out of him like water from a cracked vessel, and what was left was the pain and the heat and the knowledge that he was walking toward a locked shed when every cell in his body was screaming at him to walk the other direction. The road was empty, no cars, no people. Just the asphalt shimmering in the heat and the desert stretching out on both sides in a landscape so flat and open that it mocked the idea of confinement. Out here in the Sonoran Desert, in this vast expanse of saguaro and mesquite and dust and sky, a man was free. The desert didn't care about padlocks or sheds or grandsons with steady blue eyes and forged signatures. The desert offered the same thing to everyone. Space, light, the honest brutality of heat that could kill you if you weren't careful but would never lie to you about its intentions. Harold stopped once to rest. He found a mesquite tree near the road that threw a thin strip of shade across the gravel shoulder, and he leaned against the trunk and closed his eyes and let his knee throb, and his lungs work and his heart slow from the hammering pace it had maintained since he walked through the door of Rosie's Griddle 2 hours ago. 2 hours. In 2 hours, his life had changed more than it had changed in the previous 2 years. In 2 hours, he had eaten a meal, had spoken the truth to another human being, had given a key to a stranger and placed his life in the hands of a man he'd known for 45 minutes. In 2 hours, he had done more to save himself than the entire system that was supposed to protect him had done in 22 months. He thought about Rosa. Not Rosa, her name was Patty. Patty Fulbright at the bank. The woman who had heard him whisper "this isn't right, he's taking it all," and had called Adult Protective Services that same afternoon. She had tried. The system had responded. A caseworker had come. And the caseworker had sat in Harold's kitchen with Travis in the room smiling his trustworthy smile and had asked Harold if he felt safe. And Harold had looked at Travis and Travis had looked at Harold, and in that look was everything. The threat, the warning, the absolute certainty that if Harold said no, if Harold told the truth, the caseworker would leave and Travis would stay, and what happened after that would be worse than anything that had come before. So Harold had said everything was fine, and the case was closed, and the system believed the younger voice. Harold opened his eyes, pushed himself off the mesquite tree, kept walking. The shed was a quarter-mile ahead now. He could see the roof above the back fence, the plywood on the window catching the afternoon sun and throwing it back in a dull brown glare. He thought about what Garrett had said. Let him keep thinking you're broken. And Harold realized that this was something he had been doing instinctively for months without giving it a name. Playing broken, performing confusion, letting Travis believe that the shed had accomplished what Travis intended it to accomplish, that Harold Pemberton had been reduced, diminished, worn down to a nub the way the child in the diner had worn down the crayon, that the man inside the shed was a lesser version of the man who had entered it, and this performance, this deliberate, sustained act of appearing to be exactly what Travis wanted him to be, was itself a form of engineering, a form of precision, a load-bearing calculation in which the load was deception, and the structure was Harold's face and voice and body language. And the tolerance was measured not in pounds per square inch, but in the narrow margin between appearing broken enough to avoid suspicion and remaining whole enough to keep writing in the notebook and oiling the lock on the storage unit and working the latch with the butter knife. He reached the property, went around back. The shed door was open the way he had left it, the padlock hanging loose. He stepped inside, sat on the cot, pulled the door shut, worked the padlock until it clicked. That sound. But this time the sound carried a different weight. This time the click of the padlock was not an ending. It was a pause, a held breath between the question and the answer, between the walk to the diner and whatever came next, between the man who had walked out of this shed with a butter knife and a brass key in his pocket, and the man who would walk out of it for the last time when the answer came. He reached the property at 4:27. Travis's truck was not in the driveway. Harold walked around the back, past the trimmed hedges and the clean lawn, and the welcome mat at the front door that said, "Bless this home," and he went to the shed. The padlock was hanging open where he had left it. He looked at it, that small piece of metal that had been the border of his world for 2 years. He stepped inside. The heat hit him first. The shed was hotter inside than out. The sealed window held the air in like an oven. The cot, the bucket, the shelf with the cans, the nail on the wall. He sat down on the cot, pulled the door shut behind him, reached through the gap, and worked the padlock until it clicked. Metal finding metal. That sound, the sound that lived in his bones. But this time, for the first time, the sound did not erase him. This time the lock clicked, and Harold Pemberton sat on his cot in his shed in the dark, and he pressed his palms together, and he breathed, in and out, slow and steady, the way a man breathes when he knows something the lock does not know. That someone has the key, not the key to the padlock, the key to something bigger. A brass key to a storage unit on a frontage road past a truck stop. A key that was sitting right now in the vest pocket of a man named Garrett Slade, pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. And on the wall at eye level, scratched into the drywall with a nail, 5 words glowed in the darkness. even though there was no light to see them by. Harold did not need light. He had carved them himself. He knew them by touch, by heart, by the groove of each letter under his fingertip. I am still here. Boone Driscoll showed up at 8:45. He always showed up early. That was the thing about Boone. 310 pounds, hands like engine blocks, a jaw that looked like it had been poured from concrete and left to cure in the sun. He had done 18 months in Florence for breaking a man's orbital bone in a bar parking lot off Route 77. The man had been dragging a woman by her hair across the gravel toward his truck. Boone had asked him once to stop. The man swung. Boone didn't ask again. He served his time, came out, and never once said he'd do it differently. He walked into Garrett's shop, a cinder block building behind a chain link fence on the south side of Tucson, where motorcycles went to be rebuilt and conversations went to never be repeated. He pulled a stool from under the workbench and sat without a word. He could read Garrett's posture the way most people read headlines. Something was wrong, something heavy. So Boone sat and waited. Virgil Redmond arrived at 9 on the dot, 58 years old, lean, quiet the way a blade is quiet. He had been in the club longer than anyone in the Arizona chapter, spoke maybe 30 words on a good day, and 20 of them were the ones that mattered. He leaned against the door frame and crossed his arm and looked at Garrett with eyes that had seen enough to fill several lifetimes and had decided long ago that most of what they saw was not worth commenting on. "Close the door," Garrett said. Virgil closed it. Garrett pulled the brass key from his vest pocket and set it on the workbench. He told them everything. Every word Harold had said. The grandson, the shed, the padlock, the money, the insurance, the doctor, the bruises, the notebook, the storage unit. He told them how Harold had walked across the diner floor on a TE that could barely hold him, how 7 tables had turned him away, how the old man had stood in the middle of the room with nowhere left to go and walked to the one table everyone else avoided. When Garrett finished, Boone was gripping the edge of the stool so hard the metal was bending under his fingers. The veins in his forearms stood out like cables. "How old did you say he was?" 74. And the grandson locks him in a shed, padlock on the outside, cot inside, bucket in the corner, windows boarded shut. Boone stood up. The stool scraped against the concrete floor with a sound like a short scream. "Give me the address." "No. Give me the address, Garrett." "Sit down." "I'm not going to sit down. You just told me a 35-year-old man is keeping his own grandfather in a cage and starving him. You told me there's a bucket in the corner where the man has to give me the address and I'll handle it tonight." Garrett's voice didn't rise. It lowered. That was worse. Everyone who knew Garrett knew that the louder men get, the less dangerous they are. Garrett got quieter. And when Garrett got quiet, the room got smaller. "You go to that house tonight and break that kid's jaw, which is what you want to do, which is what I want to do, and Harold Pemberton goes into the system. Ward of the state. Some facility in Phoenix where he doesn't know anyone and nobody knows him. And Travis walks, gets a lawyer, plays the victim, tells the judge a biker gang attacked him in his home. The story writes itself. We lose. Harold loses. Travis wins." Boone's chest was heaving. His fists were clenched at his sides like 2 wrecking balls waiting for a building. "So what do? We do it right." They drove to Desert Ridge Storage in Virgil's pickup. No bikes, no patches, no vests. 3 men in a truck that looked like every other truck on the road at 10 o'clock on a Friday night in southern Arizona. Virgil drove. Boone rode shotgun. Garrett sat in the back with the brass key turning between his fingers, the metal warm from his body heat. Garrett drove in silence. The desert stretched around them in every direction, flat and dark and endless. The stars overhead, so thick and bright that they looked like someone had spilled salt across a black tablecloth. The air coming through the truck windows was still warm, even at 10 o'clock, the desert holding the day's heat, the way a cast iron pan holds the heat of a stove long after the burner is turned off. The road was empty, no headlights, no taillights, just the yellow line dividing the asphalt and the truck's high beams pushing into the darkness, and the sound of the engine, and the 3 men breathing inside the cab. Boone had not spoken since they left the shop. This was unusual. Boone was not a quiet man by nature. He was a man who filled rooms with his voice and his presence, and the sheer physicality of 310 pounds of bone and muscle and the kind of energy that comes from a body that was built for action and a mind that was perpetually ready for it. But right now, Boone was quiet. Right now, Boone was sitting in the passenger seat with his hands on his knees and his jaw working the muscles in his temples, flexing and releasing the physical manifestation of a fury that had no outlet. Not yet. Virgil drove the way he did everything. Steady, economical, no wasted motion, hands at 10 and 2, eyes on the road, speed exactly 3 miles over the limit, which was the speed that attracted no attention from police and shaved enough time off the drive to matter. Virgil had been driving since he was 14, first on dirt roads in the high desert north of Flagstaff, then on highways that stretched across the state like veins on a map, then on roads that didn't have names and didn't appear on any map and served purposes that Virgil never discussed and would never discuss, because some roads are for riding and some roads are for forgetting. The storage facility appeared on the right side of the frontage road like a small fortress. Chain link fence topped with 3 strands of barbed wire. Orange roll-up doors in 2 long rows facing each other across a gravel lot. A security light that buzzed and flickered every 30 seconds like it was trying to decide whether or not to quit. The kind of place that existed on the margins of things, between the highway and the desert, between the city and the emptiness, between the things people keep and the things people throw away. The storage facility was the kind of place where people put things they didn't want to deal with. Chain link fence topped with 3 strands of barbed wire, orange roll-up doors, a security light that buzzed and flickered every 30 seconds like it was trying to decide whether or not to quit. Gravel lot, no attendant, just a keypad and a gate, and the kind of silence that settles over places where people store the things they can't throw away and can't keep in the house. Unit 19. Garrett slid the key in. The lock turned smooth. Harold had kept it oiled. A man locked in a shed who still had the discipline to oil a lock he could only use in secret. That told Garrett something. That told him everything. The door rolled up. Inside, a single file box sat on the concrete floor. Nothing else, no furniture, no clutter, no excess, just the box. Like Harold had stripped his entire life down to the one thing that mattered and placed it here in this rented space in this anonymous building where Travis couldn't touch it. Garrett opened the box. Bank statements, stacked in chronological order. Every withdrawal highlighted in yellow with a marker that must have been smuggled into the shed the same way the cash had been smuggled into the boot. $5,000 on March 10th, $8,000 on April 2nd, $3,000 on April 19th, $10,000 on May 5th, $15,000 in a single transaction on June 1st. The numbers kept climbing, month after month, page after page, yellow highlights screaming from the paper like bruises on a ledger. Boone picked up the insurance policy, read it once, read it again. His lips moved. $480,000. Beneficiary change from the VFW post in Tucson to Travis James Whitmore. Changed 9 months ago. The signature on the change form was shaky but legible. Harold's name. But the handwriting didn't match the notebook. He forged it, Boone said. The old man didn't sign this. Look at the slant. Look at the pressure. This was written by a younger hand trying to shake, trying to look old. But the letter spacing is too even. An old man with arthritis doesn't space his letters like that. This is a forgery. Garrett pulled out the medical records. Dr. Judith Hargrove, M.D., Internal Medicine Office in Oro Valley. The diagnosis was typed on official letterhead. Moderate to severe cognitive decline. Recommendation full-time supervised care. Patient unable to manage financial, legal, or personal affairs independently. The date on the report was 2 days after Harold's crossword time was 9 minutes. And then Garrett found the notebook. Blue cover, spiral bound, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $2. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small, tight, controlled. The handwriting of a man who had spent 33 years writing engineering specifications where one wrong number could bring a bridge down. Every letter precise, every word deliberate, every entry dated. If anything happens to me, this is why. Garrett read, March 12th. Travis took the checkbook. Today, I asked for it back. He grabbed my arm. First time, left a mark above the elbow. He said I was being difficult. March 26th. No visitors in 2 weeks. Mrs. Patterson brought a casserole. Travis met her at the door, told her I was sleeping. I was standing in the hallway behind him. She didn't see me. April 4th, Travis went to the bank with my social security number. Patty at the counter called me. I couldn't get to the phone. Travis had it in his truck. April 19th, Travis moved me to the shed today, said the house needed work, said it was temporary. There was a padlock on the door when I came back from using the bathroom. I heard it click. That sound. I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. May 1st, found the insurance paperwork in the kitchen trash under coffee grounds. Beneficiary changed. He didn't think I'd look. He never thinks I'll look. May 15th, haven't been outside the property in 5 weeks. The back fence has a gap near the east corner. I could fit through if I had to. Not yet. Not until I have the proof. June 2nd, Hargrove came to the house, asked me questions. I answered them all correctly. She wrote cognitive decline on the form anyway. Travis was smiling, the kind of smile people give when they've won something they didn't earn. June 8th, half a can of beans for dinner. Travis brought groceries yesterday. None of them went to the shed. June 10th, I started working the latch with a butter knife. The screws are old brass. They'll give if I keep at it. I have nothing but time. June 14th, today I leave. Garrett closed the notebook. He held it in both hands. He pressed it against his chest, and he stood in that storage unit under the buzzing light, and he did not move for a long time. The gravel outside was silent. The night was silent. Even the flickering security light seemed to steady itself for a moment, as if the building knew what was being held inside it and wanted to be still. Boone was sitting on the floor. His head was in his hands. This was a man who had broken bones without flinching. A man who had stared down corrections officers and stood in rooms where the wrong word meant the wrong ending. And he was sitting on a concrete floor with his head in his hands because of a spiral-bound notebook written by a 74-year-old man with a butter knife and a bad knee. Virgil spoke. First words all night, I know someone. Garrett looked at him. My cousin Lenore works in the county attorney's office, Pima County. She's a legal assistant, but she's got the DA's ear. If this is what it looks like, she can move it. How fast? Fast enough. They locked the unit, put everything back exactly as they had found it, drove back to the shop in silence. The kind of silence that happens between men who have just seen something that changed the shape of the room they were standing in. The kind of silence that means everything has been decided and all that remains is the doing. The next morning, Garrett woke at 5. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the first page of that notebook. If anything happens to me, this is why. A man who knew he might not survive, writing instructions for whoever found his body. Garrett drove to the Whitmore property. No vest, no patches, jeans, and a plain gray t-shirt. He parked 2 streets over and walked. The house looked normal from the front. Clean lawn, trimmed hedges, a welcome mat at the front door. Travis's car was gone. At work. Harold had said Travis left by 8 every morning. It was 8:20. Garrett went around the back. The shed was 20 feet from the house. The padlock hung open. Harold had worked the latch again with the butter knife. Smart. If Travis checked, the lock would look closed from a distance. The mechanism was compromised, but the appearance was maintained. An engineer's solution. Garrett pushed the door open. He had seen prison cells bigger than this. A cot with a thin blanket that wouldn't keep a dog warm in January. A bucket in the corner with a lid that didn't fit. 4 cans of soup on a plywood shelf. A sleeve of crackers going stale. A broken space heater with a frayed cord that hadn't worked in months. The window sealed from the outside with plywood and screws driven in deep, the screw heads stripped so they couldn't be removed from the inside even if Harold had a screwdriver, which he did not. And on the wall, at eye level for a man sitting on a cot, scratched into the drywall with a nail, 5 words, I am still here. Garrett stared at those words. He pressed his palm flat against the wall. He could feel the grooves where the nail had cut through paint and plaster. Each letter carved deep, deliberate, not scratched in panic, carved in defiance. The handwriting of a man who was not losing his mind. The handwriting of a man who wanted the wall to know he was still inside it. He took out his phone and photographed everything. The cot, the bucket, the shelf, the sealed window, the padlock, the words on the wall. Every photograph a piece of evidence. Every photograph a page from a story that Travis had written in silence and Harold had rewritten in resistance. He left without a sound. Over the next 2 days, Garrett made calls. Not the kind that start with a phone number. The kind that start with a name and end with a conversation in a parking lot or a back booth or a truck cab with the engine running and the windows up. Earl Buckner, retired mail carrier. Walked the route past Harold's house for 17 years. Earl said he used to see Harold every morning at out front, coffee and hand waving. Same time every day, rain or shine or 110 degrees. Then one day he stopped coming out. Earl knocked twice. Travis answered both times. Said Harold was resting. Earl told Garrett that old men don't just stop waving, not the ones who've done it every morning for 17 years. Patty Fulbright, bank teller at First National. She remembered the day Harold leaned across the counter, his eyes darting toward the door, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't right, he's taking it all. Patty had called Adult Protective Services that same afternoon. A caseworker visited the house 3 days later. Travis was in the room the entire time. The caseworker asked Harold if he felt safe. Harold looked at Travis. Travis was smiling. Harold said everything was fine. The case was closed. Patty told Garrett the sentence that made him pull his truck to the side of the road and sit there for 10 minutes staring at the steering wheel. The system believed the younger voice. 6 words that explained everything. Why the bank didn't freeze the accounts. Why the caseworker closed the file. Why the neighbors stopped asking. Why the pastor stopped coming. Why an entire community looked at a 74-year-old man who was screaming for help and heard nothing. Because Travis was young and polite and clean-cut and articulate, and he told a story about a confused old man who didn't know what was happening to him, and everyone believed the younger voice. Sheila Overstreet, bartender at the VFW Post on Speedway. Harold had been a Thursday night regular. Trivia night, 6 years running, never missed. His team was called the Bridge Builders. Sheila said one Thursday Harold didn't show. Next week, Travis called the VFW and said Harold wasn't up to coming anymore. Sheila tried calling Harold's number. Disconnected. Each conversation was a piece of a puzzle that Garrett was assembling in his mind. Each person he spoke to added a detail, a color, a shape that fit into the picture of what Travis Whitmore had done and how he had done it. And the picture that was forming was not the picture of a man who had snapped, not the picture of a man who had made a mistake under pressure or acted in a moment of anger or stumbled into cruelty the way some people stumble into debt one small decision at a time until the total is beyond comprehension. The picture was of a system, a machine on a carefully designed, methodically executed operation that had been planned and refined and improved over time the way an engineer improves a design. Travis had not improvised. He had not reacted. He had constructed, piece by piece, step by step. First the isolation, then the financial control, then the medical cover, then the confinement, each step building on the last, each step making the next one possible, each step closing another door, until Harold Pemberton was locked behind so many closed doors that the idea of escape was not just difficult, but architecturally impossible. Except that Harold was an engineer too, and engineers know that every system has a weak point, every structure has a tolerance, every door has a latch. And if you apply consistent pressure to the right point, if you work the screws with a butter knife every day for weeks, if you keep your mind sharp and your notebook filled, and your money hidden in a boot, and your storage unit to be oiled, and your hope carved into a wall, even the most carefully designed prison can be opened from the inside. Garrett took all of it to Lenore Calloway. Virgil drove him to her office after hours. She met them in the parking garage. Professional, careful. She understood what this was. She understood what it could become if it was handled wrong. One misstep and the evidence gets challenged. One wrong move and Travis's lawyer turns the narrative inside out, and the man in the shed becomes a footnote in a dismissed case. Lenore stood under the fluorescent light of the parking garage with the notebook open in her hands, and she read the first page. If anything happens to me, this is why. She read it twice. The second time she read it slower, the way lawyers read things when they are not just reading for content, but for admissibility, for weight, for the way the words will sound when spoken aloud to 12 strangers in a box. She had seen a lot of documents in 14 years of prosecutorial work. Confessions and contracts and crime scene reports in the particular kind of paperwork that accumulates around human misery like sediment around a riverstone. She had seen documents that made her angry and documents that made her question whether the legal system she had dedicated her life to was capable of delivering anything resembling justice. But she had never seen a document like this notebook, because this notebook was not written by a lawyer or a detective or a forensic accountant. It was written by an engineer. And engineers don't write the way other people write. Engineers write with precision, with specificity, with the understanding that every word is a measurement and every measurement must be accurate, because inaccuracy in an engineering specification can bring a bridge down and inaccuracy in a legal document can set a guilty man free. Every entry in Harold's notebook was dated. Every amount was recorded to the dollar. Every conversation was quoted with the specificity of a man who understood that he was building a case the same way he had once built bridges. One beam at a time, one bolt at a time, one entry at a time. And the case he had built, sitting on a cot in a locked shed with a pen he had hidden in the lining of his pillow and a notebook he had smuggled inside a magazine that Travis had tossed into the shed, thinking it was just another piece of trash for the old man to look at. The case Harold Pemberton had built was stronger than any case Lenore Calloway had ever seen come across her desk. She spent 20 minutes with the documents. Bank statements spread on the hood of Virgil's truck. Medical records angled toward the fluorescent light. The notebook opened page after page, the handwriting marching across each line with the precision of an engineering specification. When she finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The notebook alone is devastating," she said. "Contemporaneous record, dated entries, specific details, written by a man who is clearly competent. Any jury that reads this notebook will convict." "What about the doctor?" "The Hargrove diagnosis is the thread we pull. If we can prove the cognitive decline was fabricated, the whole house of cards falls. The financial power of attorney, the insurance change, the justification for confinement. All of it rests on that diagnosis. Take out the diagnosis and Travis has no legal cover for anything he's done. Can you get this to the county attorney? I can get it reviewed by Monday. If the CA signs off, we go to a judge for an emergency welfare check, not the kind where a caseworker shows up and Travis controls the room, the kind where deputies go in with a search warrant. No notice, no warning. Travis doesn't get to clean up. How fast after Monday? Could be days, could be a week. He's in a shed, Lenore, with 4 cans of soup and a bucket." Lenore looked at him. Her eyes were hard, but her voice was not. "I know, but if we rush this and the warrant gets challenged, Travis's attorney will tear it apart. And then Travis knows we're coming, and Harold disappears, not into a shed, into a facility somewhere Travis controls. Or worse." She didn't say what worse meant. She didn't have to. "Stay away from the house," Lenore said. "Stay away from Travis. Do not go near Harold. If Travis's attorney finds out a Hells Angels member was the catalyst for this investigation, the defense narrative writes itself. Biker gang harassment, vigilante justice, intimidation. You know what a jury hears when they hear your club's name." Garrett knew. He had spent 25 years knowing. "When it moves fast," Lenore said. "But until then, you stay invisible." Staying invisible was the hardest thing Garrett Slade had ever done. Harder than any ride. Harder than any room he had walked into, not knowing if he would walk out. Because this time there was nothing to fight. No man to face. No road to ride. Just waiting. Just trusting the system he had spent his entire adult life operating outside of to do what it was supposed to do. He sent word to Harold the only way he could. Through Earl, the mail carrier still walked the road. Garrett met him at a gas station on Ina Road and gave him 3 words written on a folded piece of paper. "Friday, stay ready." Earl looked at the paper, looked at Garrett, didn't ask a single question, just folded the paper into his shirt pocket and nodded the way a man nods when he understands that what he is holding is not a piece of paper, but a lifeline. The next morning, Earl walked his route. He found Harold sitting on the step outside the shed. The padlock was hanging open. Travis was at work. The sun was pushing 106 degrees, and Harold was sitting in it because the shed was hotter inside than out. Earl handed him the paper. Harold unfolded it, read the 3 words. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were steady. He closed them, took a breath, pressed the paper against his chest. "Tell him thank you," Harold said. Earl nodded, turned, walked back to his truck. Harold sat on that step for another hour. He held the paper in his lap. 3 words. Friday. Stay ready. Written by a stranger he had known for less than an hour. A man he had found at the last table in a roadside diner because every other table had said no. He folded the paper small enough to fit inside the sole of his shoe where Travis would never think to look. Then he went back inside the shed and pulled the door shut behind him and waited. But on Wednesday night, something happened that Harold had not planned for. Travis came home early. His truck pulled into the driveway at 4:30 instead of 6. Harold heard the tires on the gravel and his stomach dropped. He was sitting on the cot. The paper was in his shoe. The butter knife was under the mattress. Everything looked the same. Everything had to look the same. The padlock rattled. The door swung open. Travis stood in the doorway. His silhouette blocked the light. He was holding something. Harold squinted. A grocery bag. Travis set it on the floor. 2 cans of soup. A bottle of water. He looked at Harold the way he always looked at him. That expression of mild concern that was as real as a painted smile on a mannequin. "You need anything?" Harold shook his head. Travis didn't leave. He stood there, longer than usual. His eyes moved around the shed, over the cot, over the shelf, over the bucket, over the wall with the 5 words that Travis had never noticed because Travis never looked at the wall. He looked at the floor. He looked at Harold's shoes. Harold felt his blood freeze. The paper. In the soul, if Travis made him take off his shoes. "I talked to someone today," Travis said. His voice was casual, almost friendly, the way a cat's purr sounds before the claws come out. "A colleague at work. Her mother is in a place up in Scottsdale. Nice place, good staff. Memory care unit, they have openings." Harold said nothing. "I've been thinking about it for a while," Travis continued. "This arrangement you out here, it's not sustainable. It's not good for you. You need real care, professional care, people who are trained to handle this kind of thing." "I don't need care," Harold said. His voice was flat, controlled, every word measured. Travis tilted his head. That gesture, the one that said, "You poor, confused old man, you don't even know what you need. We'll talk about it. Get some sleep." He reached for the door, pulled it shut. The padlock clicked. That sound. Harold sat on the cot in the dark. His heart was hammering. His hands were in his lap. His heart was a drum. The paper was in his shoe. The butter knife was under the mattress. Everything was where it was supposed to be. But everything felt different now because Travis had said the word Scottsdale, and Scottsdale meant a facility, and a facility meant a locked ward, and a locked ward meant that the shed, as terrible as it was freedom compared to what came next. In a facility, there would be no latch to work with a butter knife, no gap in the back fence to squeeze through, no storage unit with a notebook and a brass key. In a facility, Harold would be a patient, a number, a bed in a hallway, a name on a chart that someone checked once a day. He would be medicated if Travis pushed for it, sedated. The sharp mind that had scored in the 94th percentile would be dulled and blunted and wrapped in a pharmaceutical fog that would make the crossword impossible and the notebook unthinkable, and the very idea of resistance as distant as the lighthouses Dorothy had wanted to see. Travis knew this. Travis understood that the shed was a temporary solution, a holding pattern, a way to keep Harold contained while the larger plan matured. The larger plan was the insurance, $480,000. And the insurance required Harold alive but incapacitated, alive but unable to challenge, alive but invisible. A facility would accomplish that more efficiently than a shed. A facility had doctors and nurses and paperwork and the institutional authority that comes from letterhead and licensing, and the assumption that the people in charge must know what they are doing because they have certificates on their walls. Harold pressed his palms together and breathed. 2 more days. He had survived 2 years. He had survived the padlock and the bucket and the half cans of beans and the bruises on his wrists and the sound of Travis's voice saying, "Who's going to believe you?" He had survived all of that with a butter knife and a notebook and the 5 words on the wall. He could survive 2 more days. He closed his eyes and he thought about Garrett Slade sitting in the dark corner of a diner with a brass key in his vest pocket. He thought about the way Garrett had looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. The way you look at a bridge before you cross it. Not the surface, the structure. Harold was the structure, and the structure was holding. For 2 more days, the structure would hold. A facility, Scottsdale. If Travis moved him before Friday, if Travis decided the shed was too much trouble and loaded him into the truck and drove him to some locked ward in a building 2 hours away, no one would find him. Not Garrett, not Lenore, not the deputies with the warrant. Harold would vanish into the system the way water vanishes into sand. He pulled the paper from his shoe, held it in the dark. Friday. Stay ready. 2 more days. 2 more days in the shed. 2 more nights on the cot. 2 more mornings listening for the truck to start and the tires to crunch down the driveway before he could breathe. He pressed the paper against his chest and he held. The way he had been holding for 2 years. The way a bridge holds when the load exceeds the design, but the math holds because the engineer who built it knew what he was doing. Thursday passed. Travis came to the shed at 7:15 as always. Opened the padlock, looked inside, asked if Harold needed anything. The same performance, the same tone, but this time Travis studied him a beat longer than usual. His eyes narrowed by a fraction. Then he closed the door. The padlock clicked. The truck started. The tires crunched. The engine faded. Harold breathed. 1 more day. He had been awake since 4. The shed was dark. The plywood blocked everything, even the pre-dawn gray that would have been visible through glass. But Harold knew it was 4 because he had counted. He had been counting since midnight, counting seconds, counting minutes, counting the hours between the last time he heard Travis's truck pull into the driveway and the first sound of the alarm clock going off in the house at 6:30. The alarm was faint through the shed walls, a thin electronic beeping that Harold had memorized the rhythm of. 3 beeps, a pause, 3 beeps, a pause. Then silence when Travis hit the button. Then the sound of the shower running through the pipes that passed under the shed on their way from the well to the house. Then the pipes going quiet. Then footsteps on the back porch. Then the shed door. Harold lay on the cot and waited. His eyes were open, but there was nothing to see. The dark was total, complete. The kind of dark that has weight. The kind of dark that presses against your eyes and your skin and fills your ears with a silence that sounds like the inside of a seashell, the blood in your own veins mistaken for the ocean. He thought about the paper in his shoe. Friday, stay ready. He had read those words so many times in the last 3 days that he could feel them through the soul, could feel the indent of the pen against the ball of his foot. 3 words, the weight of them was nothing. The weight of them was everything. He thought about what ready meant. He was sitting on a cot in a locked shed in a pair of pants he had been wearing for 4 days and a shirt with the buttons in the wrong holes and shoes with a secret message in the sole and a butter knife under the mattress. He had no phone, no car, no identification, no money except the coins in the pocket of a pair of pants in the back of the shed that Travis didn't know about. He had a bad knee and bruised wrists and a body that had been running on half rations for months. He had no weapon, no ally within reach, no way to communicate with anyone outside the property. But he was ready. Because ready is not about what you have. Ready is about what you are. And Harold Pemberton, 74 years old, bridge engineer, crossword champion, husband of Dorothy, author of a spiral-bound notebook with a blue cover carver of 5 words into a wall, was ready. He was ready the way a bridge is ready when the load comes. Not because the bridge chose to be strong, because the engineer who built it refused to let it be anything else. 6:30, the alarm, the shower, the pipes, the footsteps. The shed door opened. Travis stood in the doorway, morning light behind him, his face in shadow. You need anything? Harold shook his head. The door closed. The padlock clicked. The truck started at 7:20. The tires crunched. The engine faded. Harold sat on the cot, his hands in his lap, his thumbs pressed together, his knee throbbing, and he counted the hours, the minutes, the seconds between now and 10 o'clock, between now and the answer, between now and freedom, or between now and the end of everything. He counted, because counting was control, and control was all he had. Friday came the way a hell breath finally releases. At 9:45, two Pima County Sheriff's cruisers turned onto the road that led to the Whitmore property. Behind them, an unmarked sedan carrying the APS caseworker and the victim's advocate from the county attorney's office. No sirens, no lights. A welfare check doesn't announce itself. Travis was at work. His office was 22 minutes away. Lenore had confirmed his schedule. He had a 10:15 meeting with a client. He would not be home. But Travis had a security camera on the front porch. A small device mounted above the door angled to capture the driveway and the walkway and anyone who came within 30 feet of the entrance. A detail he had never mentioned to Harold. A detail Harold did not know about. A detail that in 2 minutes would change everything. The deputies pulled into the driveway at 9:58. Deputy Sarah Montoya, 8 years on the force, stepped out first. Her partner, Deputy James Caldwell, 19 years, walked to the front door. The caseworker and the advocate stayed by the sedan. Caldwell knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. Montoya walked the perimeter. She found the backyard. She found the shed. She saw the padlock. Caldwell, back here. Caldwell came around the house. He looked at the padlock, looked at Montoya. That's a residential padlock on an exterior door, Montoya said. On a structure with a sealed window. Could be storage. Could be. Warrant says we open it. Caldwell radioed dispatch. Confirmed the warrant number. Confirmed authority to breach. Then he pulled bolt cutters from the cruiser and walked back to the shed. The padlock resisted for exactly 1 second. Then the jaws of the bolt cutters bit through and the lock dropped to the dirt like a dead thing. Like a small metal corpse. Montoya pulled the door open. Harold was sitting on the cot. He was holding the butter knife. The same one he had used on the latch for weeks. He was gripping it in his right hand. Not as a weapon, as a tool. The only tool he had. The thing that had opened the door when nothing else would. He looked up at the deputies. His eyes were wet. His hands were shaking. But his voice was clear. Is it Friday? Montoya felt something seize in her chest. She had been on the force 8 years. She had seen domestic violence. She had seen neglect. She had pulled children out of houses that no child should have been in. But something about those 3 words, is it Friday, spoken by a 74-year-old man sitting on a cot in a locked shed holding a butter knife. Something about the way he asked it, not with fear but with hope, broke something open inside her that she would carry for the rest of her career. Yes, sir. It's Friday. Harold closed his eyes. His shoulders dropped. The butter knife fell from his fingers and clattered on the concrete floor. He pressed both palms flat on the cot and he breathed. In and out, in and out. The way a man breathes when he has been holding for so long, he forgot what letting go felt like. My name is Harold Pemberton. I live here. This is my property. My grandson locked me in this shed. He has been doing it for 2 years. Caldwell was already photographing the interior. The cot, the thin blanket, the bucket with the ill-fitting lid, the 4 cans of soup, the sleeve of crackers, the broken space heater, the plywood screwed over the window from the outside, and on the wall, scratched into the drywall at eye level, 5 words that Caldwell photographed 3 times from 3 different angles. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. I am still here. Meanwhile, 22 miles away, Travis Whitmore's phone buzzed. The security camera app, motion detected, front porch. He opened the notification and saw 2 sheriff's cruisers in his driveway. His face did not change. That was the thing about Travis. His face never changed. Not when he grabbed Harold's arm the first time. Not when he signed the forged insurance documents. Not when he locked the shed door and heard the old man on the other side asking to be let out. His face was a mask he had worn so long it had fused to the bone. He stood up from his desk, told his office manager he had a family emergency, drove home at exactly the speed limit. Not faster, not slower. A man in a hurry attracts attention. Travis never attracted attention. He pulled into the driveway at 10:27. The deputies were already in the backyard. The caseworker was sitting with Harold on the back steps, a blanket around his shoulders despite the heat. The advocate was on the phone. Travis stepped out of his truck. He straightened his shirt. He walked toward them with the expression he had practiced in mirrors and perfected in living rooms, in church lobbies, in bank offices, in every room he had ever entered where the truth needed to be replaced with something more presentable. The expression of a concerned, loving, slightly overwhelmed caregiver. Officers. What's going on? Is everything okay? Is my grandfather all right? Montoya turned to face him. She studied him the way she studied everyone she encountered on a call. Not his words, his hands. His hands were at his sides, relaxed, open, the hands of a man who had nothing to hide, or the hands of a man who knew exactly how to look like he had nothing to hide. Mr. Whitmore, we're executing a welfare check pursuant to a judicial order. Can you tell me about the structure in the backyard? The shed. Of course, we converted it. My grandfather likes his space. He's always been independent. Doesn't like being in the main house all day. There was a padlock on the exterior of the door. Travis didn't blink. For the animals. Coyotes come through the neighborhood. We've had issues. Your grandfather was inside when we opened it. He likes to rest out there. He probably closed the door himself. The lock was on the outside, sir. Travis paused. 1 second. Recalculating. The machine behind his eyes processing inputs, generating responses, selecting the optimal output. I must have. Sometimes I lock it out of habit when I leave for work. I check on him every morning. I must have locked it without realizing he was inside. That's entirely my fault. Is he okay, Smooth? Fluid. Every answer ready before the question finished. A man who had rehearsed every possible scenario the way Harold had rehearsed load-bearing calculations. Except Travis's math was built on lies. And lies have tolerances too. Push them far enough and they break. Caldwell came around the corner. His face was tight. Deputy Montoya, you need to see the interior. Montoya followed him to the shed. She looked inside. She saw the cot, the bucket, the sealed window, the words on the wall. She came back to Travis. Sir, can you explain why the window of that structure is sealed from the outside with plywood? Travis's mask flickered. Half a second. A micro-expression that most people would miss. Montoya did not miss it. She had been trained not to miss it. The glass was broken. We boarded it up. Haven't had a chance to replace it. The plywood is screwed in from the exterior. There's a cot inside, a bucket, 4 cans of food, no running water, no working heat. He has access to the house. He comes and goes. He just prefers Mr. Whitmore. Your grandfather has bruising on both wrists consistent with physical restraint. Travis's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time, the script had run out. He stood in his own driveway in his pressed shirt, in his leather shoes, and his carefully constructed face, and he had nothing left to perform. I want to call my lawyer. You're not under arrest, sir, but we are transporting your grandfather to Tucson Medical Center for evaluation. He doesn't need a hospital. He's fine. He's confused sometimes, but that's what the evaluation will determine. The paramedics arrived at 10:41. Harold was sitting on the back steps when they came around the house with the stretcher. He looked at it and shook his head. I can walk. His voice was firm, tired but firm. The caseworker helped him stand. His knee buckled and she caught his arm gently, not the way Travis caught it, and steadied him. As Harold passed Travis in the driveway, something happened that neither deputy expected. Harold stopped. He turned his head. He looked at his grandson, not with anger, not with hatred, not with the broken, submissive eyes Travis had spent 2 years manufacturing. Harold looked at Travis with clarity, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who someone is because you have watched them become it day by day in a locked room with nothing to do but observe. Travis looked back, and for the first time he saw it. The old man's eyes were sharp, focused, present, the eyes of a man who had never been confused a single day in the last 2 years. The eyes of a man who had kept a notebook, who had rented a storage unit, who had carved words into a wall, who had engineered his own rescue with a butter knife and a brass key. Travis's mask cracked, not on the surface, deeper, behind the eyes, in the place where he stored the truth about himself that he never let anyone see. Harold didn't say a word. He turned away and let the caseworker guide him to the ambulance. As the paramedics were loading him in, Harold asked one of them a question. A young woman named Casey leaned in to hear him. Can you get a message to someone for me? Who, sir? I don't know his full name. He's at a diner called Rosie's Griddle off the highway. He sits in the back corner. Casey looked confused. What's the message? Harold settled onto the stretcher. He looked at the ceiling of the ambulance. He closed his eyes. The sun through the open doors was warm on his arms. Real sun, Open-air sun, not the thin slices that came through plywood cracks. Tell him I'm still here. 15 miles away, Garrett Slade was pacing in his shop. He had taken a carburetor apart, put it back together, and taken it apart again. He had gone through a pot of coffee. He had checked his phone 43 times. At 11:16 it rang. Lenore's name on the screen. He answered before the first ring finished. Tell me. Lenore's voice was different. He had known her for 6 years through Virgil. She was steady professional, controlled the kind of woman who could deliver a devastating cross-examination without raising her pulse. But right now her voice had a crack in it, a fracture running through the words. They got him out. Garrett sat down on the shop floor. His legs just gave. He sat on the concrete with his back against the workbench and his phone pressed to his ear and his free hand pressed against his eyes. How is he dehydrated? Malnourished. The knee is bad. Untreated arthritis. Probably needs surgery. Bruising on both wrists. They were running a full evaluation at TMC, and the cognitive test. Lenore paused. When she spoke again, the crack widened. Clean. Not borderline. Not ambiguous. Clean. The neurologist said he scored in the 94th percentile for his age group. 94th. A man Travis convinced the entire world was losing his mind just tested higher than most people 20 years younger. Garrett pressed his hand harder against his eyes. His chest was heaving. But he was not crying. He was doing something past crying. Something that lives in a place deeper than tears can reach. What did they find? Everything he described. The cot, the bucket, the sealed window, the cans, and the words on the wall. Garrett. The deputies photographed them. I am still here. Lenore stopped, drew a breath. There's something else. When the paramedics were loading him in, he asked them to deliver a message. He said he didn't know the man's full name. He said the man sits in the back corner of a diner called Rosie's Griddle off the highway. Garrett couldn't speak. He said to tell you I'm still here. The phone was silent for a long time. Two people breathing, not talking, just existing in the shared space of a phone call that carried more weight than either of them could hold alone. Charges, Garrett finally asked. Monday. The county attorney is reviewing everything this weekend. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, unlawful confinement, fraud. We're pushing for maximum on every count. And the doctor, Hargrove. She's next. The fabricated diagnosis is the keystone. We pull that out and everything Travis built collapses. Garrett sat on the floor of his shop with his back against the workbench and the brass key still in his pocket and the words still in his head. I am still here. 5 words, carved into a wall with a nail, written by a man who had been locked in a box for 2 years and refused to disappear. He closed his eyes. He thought about a diner, about 7 tables, about 1 chair, about what it cost to pull a chair out for a stranger and what it cost not to. Monday was coming. The courtroom was coming. The truth was coming the way daylight comes after a long night. Not all at once, not with fanfare, just the slow, inevitable brightening of a sky that has been dark for too long. Harold Pemberton was out of the shed, out of the dark, out of the silence, and in a hospital room in Tucson, lying in a bed with clean sheets in a window he could open whenever he wanted. Harold pressed his palms together and looked at the ceiling and breathed the way a man breathes when the lock has been cut and the door is open and the air that fills his lungs is his own again. He was still here. Monday morning, the charges came down like a hammer on an anvil. Elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, unlawful confinement, fraud, 4 counts, each carrying significant prison time. Each one a door closing behind a man who had spent 2 years locking doors behind someone else. Travis Whitmore was arrested at his office at 9:15 in the morning. 2 detectives walked through the front door of the real estate firm where he worked and asked for Travis Whitmore by name. His co-workers watched from their desks. His office manager, the same woman he had told about the family emergency 3 days earlier, stood by the water cooler with her hand over her mouth. Travis did not resist. He put his hands behind his back without being asked. He kept the same calm, polite expression he had worn to every church fundraiser and bank meeting and neighborhood dinner party for the last 2 years. The mask held, even now, even in handcuffs, because the mask was all he had left. Take away the performance and Travis Whitmore was nothing but a man standing in an office with his wrists bound behind him and a room full of people who were seeing him clearly for the first time. His attorney, a man named Garrison Wells, held a press conference that afternoon. Silver hair, expensive watch, the kind of attorney who bills $600 an hour and earns every penny. Not because he is right, but because he is convincing. He stood on the courthouse steps and called it a reckless investigation built on unverified claims from a confused elderly man and tainted by the involvement of known criminal elements. Travis posted on social media that evening, a long, carefully written statement, every word chosen for maximum sympathy. He wrote about sacrifice, about giving up his career to care for the only family he had left, about the heartbreak of watching his grandfather decline, about false accusations born from misunderstanding and confusion. He wrote about love. He used the word love 11 times. No mention of the shed, no mention of the padlock, no mention of the money, no mention of the bucket or the comb or the boarded window or the 4 cans of soup. 700 likes in the first hour. Comments poured in like water through a broken dam. Travis is the kindest person I know. That old man doesn't know what day it is. Someone told me bikers are involved. That tells you everything you need to know. Praying for you, Travis. Stay strong. A GoFundMe launched by a friend from Travis's church raised $14,000 in 3 days. Garrett read every comment. He sat in his shop at 2 in the morning scrolling through his phone, reading every word written by people who had never seen the inside of that shed, who had never read the notebook, who had never seen the bruises or the bucket or the 5 words scratched into a wall. He wanted to post the photographs, wanted to upload every page of the notebook, wanted to put Harold's voice into the ears of every person typing prayers for Travis Whitmore. But he did not. Because Lenore had told him the courtroom was where this ended. And Garrett, for the first time in his life, trusted the courtroom. Then 1 week before trial, something happened that nobody expected. Lenore called at 8 in the morning. She didn't say hello. Hargrove flipped. Garrett sat up straight. Dr. Judith Hargrove called the county attorney's office directly this morning. She said 4 words. I want to cooperate. Why? Because we subpoenaed her records, all of them. Not just Harold's file, everything. And when her attorney saw what we were pulling, he told her the math wasn't in her favor. What did she give up? Lenore took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was the voice of a woman who had spent 14 years in prosecutorial work and thought she had seen the worst of what people do to each other. She was wrong. It's not just Harold. It was never just Harold. Hargrove has been running this for 4 years. She identifies elderly patients through free health screenings at churches, senior centers, VFW halls. She targets people who live alone or with a single family member. She builds a relationship, becomes the doctor they trust. Then she connects them with what she calls a caregiver coordinator. Travis. He moves in, takes over finances, isolates the patient, and Hargrove provides the medical cover. The cognitive decline diagnosis. The paperwork that makes everything look legal on the surface. How many? Lenore was quiet. Too quiet. Lenore. How many? 7. 7 confirmed victims. Harold was number 7. Garrett stood up. He walked to the shop door and pressed his forehead against the metal and closed his eyes. The steel was cool against his skin. The morning heat hadn't reached it yet. Did any of them? Yes. 1 word. The worst word. Clarence Munn, 83 years old, 11 months ago, found outside his home in January. The temperature that night was 24 degrees. Death certificate said natural causes. His insurance paid out 2 weeks later. $420,000. The beneficiary had been changed 9 months prior. A nephew connected to Travis through Hargrove's network. Garrett's hand was flat against the door. He could feel the metal vibrating under his palm. Or maybe that was him. The door of Clarence's house was locked, Lenore said. From the inside, he couldn't get back in. The air left the room, every molecule of it. Garrett stood with his forehead against the door and his palm pressed flat, and he felt something shift inside him that would never shift back. An 83-year-old man had frozen to death on his own property because someone locked him out of his own house in January and let the night do the rest. And it was written off as natural causes, and the insurance paid, and the world moved on. If you hadn't been sitting in that diner, Lenore said, her voice barely holding, Harold Pemberton would have been Clarence Munn. Garrett opened his eyes. He looked at the workbench, at the tools, at the brass key that still sat where he had left it the night Harold slid it across a diner table with shaking hands. "Whatever you need from me," he said. "Whatever testimony, whatever statement, whatever it costs, I'm in." "All the way. I know. You were in the moment that you pulled out that chair." The trial started on a Wednesday and the courtroom was full before the doors officially opened. Local press had taken the first 2 rows behind the prosecution table. 2 Phoenix television stations had sent crews. A reporter from the Arizona Daily Star sat in the 3rd row with a legal pad balanced on her knee and a pen that had not stopped moving since she got the tip about Hargrove's cooperation deal. The story had grown beyond a single old man in a single shed. 7 victims, a dead man named Clarence Munn, a doctor who had weaponized her medical license, a network that had been operating in plain sight for 4 years while an entire community looked the other way. And in the middle of that 3rd row, sitting where he had sat every Sunday for 20 years next to a woman named Dorothy who used to hold his hand during the sermon, Harold Pemberton took his seat. He looked different. 6 weeks had passed since the deputies cut the padlock. 6 weeks of 3 meals a day and a bed with clean sheets and a window he could open whenever he wanted. He had gained 14 pounds. The hollows in his cheeks had filled. His hair was trimmed, parted the way Dorothy had always liked it. He wore a blue button-down shirt tucked in, buttoned correctly, every button in the right hole. His hands rested in his lap, steady. The arthritis medication was working. His knee still ached, but the grinding had eased. He had walked from the parking lot to the courthouse without gripping a single chair back, without leaning on anything, without asking anyone for help. He did not look at Travis. Travis sat at the defense table in a navy suit, in a white shirt, in a tie that someone had chosen for him because Travis understood that every detail mattered. His hair was combed, his hands were folded on the table. His posture said, "I am a good man who has been wrongly accused." His posture had been saying that for 35 years. Wells sat beside him, the kind of attorney who had won cases that should have been lost, who had turned juries with tone of voice alone, who had a gift for making reasonable doubt feel like certainty. But Wells had never faced a spiral-bound notebook. The prosecution opened. Assistant County Attorney Diane Reeves stood before the jury and spoke without notes. She was 51 years old, had prosecuted everything from petty theft to homicide, and she had spent the last 3 weeks living inside Harold Pemberton's file until she could recite the bank statements from memory. She told the jury about a diner, about a man who walked through a glass door with a limp and a shirt buttoned wrong and asked 7 tables if he could sit down. She told them about 7 refusals. She told them about an 8th table. She did not mention Garrett by name. She did not mention the club. Lenore had advised her carefully. The jury did not need to know who sat at the 8th table. They needed to know that someone did. Then she walked them through the notebook. Entry by entry, March 12th. Travis took the checkbook, grabbed my arm. First time. She let that sit. April 19th. Travis moved me to the shed. I heard the padlock click. That sound. I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. She let that sit too. June 10th. I started working the latch with a butter knife. She paused, looked at the jury. 12 people, 8 women, 4 men, ages ranging from 28 to 71. The 71-year-old, a retired school teacher named Margaret Inman, had not blinked in 4 minutes. Harold Pemberton did not escape a shed, Reeves said. He engineered his own rescue, the same way he engineered bridges for 33 years. He identified the weak point. He applied consistent pressure, and he walked 1.5 miles on a knee that needed surgery to find help, because every system that should have helped him had already failed. She turned to the bank statements, projected them on a screen, yellow highlights, withdrawal after withdrawal, the numbers climbing like a fever chart. Total amount drained from Harold's accounts, $237,000 over 22 months. Then the insurance policy, $480,000. Beneficiary change from VFW Post to Travis James Whitmore. Then the medical records, Dr. Judith Hargrove, moderate to severe cognitive decline, and then the neurological evaluation from Tucson Medical Center, the one conducted 6 weeks ago. The one that showed Harold Pemberton scoring in the 94th percentile for his age group. The defendant didn't just steal from Harold Pemberton, Reeves said. He stole something no bank statement can measure. He stole Harold Pemberton's credibility. He made it so that when Harold tried to tell the truth, nobody believed him. He weaponized an old man's age against him. He turned Harold's dignity into a punchline. And he did it while smiling, while attending church, while coaching children, while accepting praise from a community that believed every word he said. Wells stood for the defense. He was good, more than good. He started soft, sympathetic. He painted Travis as a young man overwhelmed by responsibility, a 35-year-old who had given up everything to care for the only family he had left. My client isn't a monster. He's a young man who stepped in when no one else would. Dorothy Pemberton passed away, and Travis was the only one who showed up, not the neighbors, not the VFW friends, not the church. Travis. And yes, mistakes were made. Caregiver burnout is real. Stress is real. The pressure of watching someone you love decline is real. He leaned on the word decline. Let it breathe. Let the jury sit with it. The prosecution wants you to believe that Harold Pemberton was perfectly fine. But the reality is more complicated. Memory is unreliable. Self-assessment is unreliable. A man can score well on a cognitive test and still have episodes, still have moments. It was a good opening, smooth, polished. The words hung in the air the way expensive cologne hangs in an elevator. Present, noticeable, but underneath it, nothing. The prosecution called 14 witnesses over 3 days, each one a thread in the tapestry of Travis Whitmore's deception. Each one a person who had seen a piece of the truth but had not been able to assemble the whole picture because Travis had been careful to show each person only the piece he wanted them to see. The neighbor saw the mowed lawn and the washed car and the handsome young man waving from the driveway. The pastor saw the devoted grandson who spoke about his grandfather with reverence. The bank teller saw the concerned family member who was managing finances for an elderly relative. The VFW friends saw the caretaker who regretfully informed them that Harold was no longer up to attending trivia night. Each person saw a fragment, a facet, a carefully curated angle of a story that Travis had constructed with the precision of an architect and the patience of a spider. But in the courtroom, the fragments came together, the facets aligned, the angles converged, and what emerged was not the story Travis had told. What emerged was the story Harold had written in a spiral-bound notebook with a blue cover in handwriting so precise it looked like engineering specifications because it was. Because Harold Pemberton had documented his own imprisonment with the same rigor and attention to detail that he had applied to every bridge he had ever designed. Dates, amounts, quotes, observations. The notebook was not a diary, it was a blueprint of a crime drawn by the victim in the language of an engineer who understood that precision is the difference between a bridge that holds and a bridge that falls. The jury listened. 12 people, 8 women, 4 men, ages ranging from 28 to 71. They listened the way people listen when they realize that what they are hearing is not a story about someone else. It is a story about a system that had failed. A system that had looked at a 74-year-old man with bruises on his wrists and a story to tell, and had believed the younger voice. And every person on that jury knew in the place where conscience lives that they might have believed the younger voice too. That they might have been the neighbor who waved back at Travis, the pastor who took his word, the bank teller who processed the paperwork, the VFW friend who stopped calling. That they might have been any one of the 7 tables that said no. That knowledge sat in the jury box like a 13th juror, unspoken, unseen, but present, and it would inform every verdict that every one of those 12 people would ever deliver in courtrooms and in living rooms and in the small daily tribunals of conscience where people decide whether to look closer or look away. The witnesses began. Patty Fulbright took the stand first. She told the jury about the day Harold leaned across the counter, about his eyes darting toward the door, about the 6 words he whispered, "This isn't right. He's taking it all." She told them she called Adult Protective Services that same afternoon. A caseworker visited 3 days later. The case was closed. The caseworker said Harold reported he was fine. Travis was in the room the entire time. Earl Buckner, the retired mail carrier. 17 years of walking past Harold's house. The morning wave, the coffee in hand, the day the waving stopped. I knocked twice. Both times Travis answered. Said Harold was resting. But Harold never rested. That man was up at 5:30 every day for as long as I knew him. Sheila Overstreet, the VFW bartender. Thursday trivia nights. The bridge builders. Harold's laugh big and rough, the kind that made other people laugh just hearing it. The Thursday he didn't show up. The phone call from Travis the next week. She tried calling Harold's number. Disconnected. She drove to the house once. Travis met her at the door. He was very polite, very kind. He said Harold was having a difficult day. I'll never forgive myself for that, Sheila told the jury. She looked at her hands. Because Travis was so convincing. He was the kind of person you trust immediately. Clean-cut, polite, concerned. He made you feel like questioning him was insulting, like you were the one being unreasonable. Witness after witness, each one a thread in the net Travis had woven around Harold's life. The pastor who stopped visiting because Travis said Harold didn't want to see anyone. The neighbor who brought a casserole and was turned away at the door. The pharmacist who had filled Harold's prescriptions for years until Travis transferred them to a mail-order pharmacy that delivered only to the house. Each witness told the same story from a different angle. A community that had watched an old man disappear and convinced themselves it was natural because Travis was there. Because Travis was polite. Because Travis made it easy to look away. Then the neurologist took the stand. Dr. Patricia Velasco, board certified, 22 years of practice. Mr. Pemberton scored in the 94th percentile for his age group across all cognitive domains: memory, executive function, language, visual spatial processing, attention. His scores were not borderline, they were exceptional. Could a man with Mr. Pemberton's cognitive profile have episodes of confusion that would justify a diagnosis of moderate to severe decline? The diagnosis in Dr. Hargrove's records is incompatible with every metric we measured. It is not a difference of opinion. It is a fabrication. Wells cross-examined. He pushed on the timeline. Suggested cognitive function could fluctuate. Suggested Harold might have performed better because he was no longer under stress. Velasco listened to each question. Then she answered with the precision of a woman who had spent 22 years in a field where precision was the difference between a correct diagnosis and a destroyed life. Cognitive decline of the severity Dr. Hargrove documented does not fluctuate into the 94th percentile. That is not how neurology works. A patient with moderate to severe decline does not complete a crossword puzzle in 9 minutes, does not recall dates and amounts from 2 years of documentation with perfect accuracy, does not maintain a contemporaneous written record that demonstrates sustained executive function over a 22-month period. The diagnosis was false. There is no clinical ambiguity. Wells sat down. He did not recross. Then Dr. Judith Hargrove was called to the stand. The courtroom shifted. Every body leaned forward. Every pen stopped moving. The Phoenix crews adjusted their cameras. The reporter from the Star turned to a fresh page. Hargrove walked to the witness box the way a woman walks when she has already decided that the weight of what she is about to say is less than the weight of what she has been carrying. She was 56 years old, gray streaks and dark hair pulled back, no jewelry, no makeup. She wore a plain black dress and she sat down and she folded her hands and she did not look at Travis. Dr. Hargrove, you entered into a cooperation agreement with the county attorney's office. Is that correct? How long have you been doing this? 4 years. And Hargrove talked. For 3 hours she talked. She described the screenings at churches and senior centers and VFW halls. How she identified patients. The ones who lived alone, the ones with limited family, the ones whose isolation made them invisible. She described the relationship building, the trust, the slow, careful process of becoming the doctor they relied on, the voice they believed, the authority they deferred to. She described Travis, how she had connected him with patient after patient, how he moved in, how he took over, how she provided the paperwork, the diagnosis, the medical justification that made everything look legal on the surface. 7 victims. 7 elderly men and women who had been targeted, diagnosed, isolated, and drained. Some were still alive. Some were in facilities where they had been placed by the very people who were robbing them. And one of them was dead. Tell the jury about Clarence Munn. Hargrove closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. Clarence was 83. He lived alone in a house off Tanque Verde. His wife died in 2019. He had 1 nephew. The nephew was connected to Travis through me. I diagnosed Clarence with cognitive decline in March of the previous year. The nephew moved in. The same pattern. Finances, isolation, insurance change. How did Clarence Munn die? He was found outside his home in January. The temperature was 24 degrees. He had been locked out. The door was locked from the inside. He couldn't get back in. Was this an accident? No. The courtroom was so quiet that when the reporter from the Star dropped her pen, the sound carried to every corner of the room. Dr. Hargrove, in your professional and personal assessment, was Harold Pemberton ever cognitively impaired? Hargrove turned her head. For the first time since she had taken the stand, she looked at Harold, directly at him, across the courtroom, past the attorneys and the jury and the cameras and the gallery full of people who had come to watch the truth fill a room that had been empty of it for years. Harold looked back. His hands were in his lap, his thumbs pressed together. Steady. No. Harold Pemberton was one of the sharpest patients I ever examined. I knew he was competent. I knew he understood exactly what was happening to him. I falsified the records anyway. Why? Because Travis paid me. And because I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself they were old, that they wouldn't notice, that the money was going to be inherited anyway. I told myself every lie a person that tells when they know what they're doing is wrong, and they do it anyway. She was crying now. Not the performative kind, not the kind designed for a jury, the deep kind, the kind that comes from the place where you store the things you did that you can never undo. I was wrong, and Clarence Munn is dead because I was wrong. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 47 minutes. When they filed back in the foreman, a 46-year-old electrician named David Ruiz stood and unfolded the verdict form. Guilty, count 1. Elder abuse. Guilty, count 2. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Guilty, count 3. Unlawful confinement. Guilty, count 4. Fraud. Guilty on all counts. Travis stood when the verdict was read. His hands went behind his back without being asked. Still calm, still polite, still performing. Because the performance was all he had left. As the deputies led him past the gallery, Travis looked at Harold. His mouth opened. A word formed. Maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, maybe one last performance. Harold looked back. His eyes held no hatred, no rage, no satisfaction, not even relief, just clarity. The clearest, steadiest thing in the room. The eyes of a man who had carved "I am still here" into a wall and meant every letter. Travis closed his mouth. The word died. The deputies walked him through the side door. It shut behind him with a sound that had more finality than any verdict. Not a slam, not a bang, just a click. Metal finding metal, a lock closing. The same sound Harold had heard every night for 2 years. The same sound. But now it was Travis on the other side. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Roberta Crane, 17 years on the bench, read the pre-sentencing report in her chambers and sat alone for 20 minutes before taking the bench. Mr. Whitmore, in 17 years I have presided over hundreds of cases, cases involving violence, cases involving deception, cases involving betrayal. But I have never seen a case as calculated, as methodical, or as cruel as this one. You did not act in a moment of rage. You did not act under duress. You constructed a system designed to erase your grandfather as a person. You stole his money. You stole his freedom. You stole his credibility. And you did it while smiling, while attending church, while coaching children, while accepting praise from a community that believed every word you said. She paused. 24 years, maximum on every count, consecutive. Travis did not flinch. The mask held one final time. Then the deputies led him away and the mask walked through the side door and the door closed and it was gone. Hargrove received 7 years reduced for cooperation. She would testify against 2 others in the network. The State Attorney General's office opened 5 additional investigations. Clarence Munn's death was officially reclassified as a homicide. The nephew was arrested 11 days later at a motel in Flagstaff. The courtroom emptied slowly. The press went first, moving in a tight pack toward the exits, phones already out, thumbs already typing the story, already taking shape in headlines that would run within the hour. Elder abuse ring exposed. Grandfather's notebook brings down caregiver fraud network. 7 victims, 1 dead, dozens of charges. The headlines would not capture the whole truth. Headlines never do. They capture the shape of the truth the way a shadow captures the shape of the person casting it. Recognizable but flat, present but empty. The truth of what had happened in this courtroom over the last 3 days was not something that could fit into a headline. It was too large and too heavy and too complicated and too human. The witnesses filed out next. Patty Fulbright walked out of the courtroom and sat on a bench in the hallway and cried for 10 minutes. Not because the verdict surprised her. Because the verdict confirmed something she had known in her bones since the day Harold leaned across the counter at First National and whispered the 6 words that had haunted her for 22 months. This isn't right. He's taking it all. She had known. She had acted. She had called Adult Protective Services. She had done the right thing. And the system had failed anyway. The caseworker had come and gone. The case had been closed. And Harold had spent another 14 months in a shed because the system believed the younger voice. Patty sat on that bench and she cried because she was thinking about all the other Harolds. All the other old men and women sitting in rooms and sheds and back bedrooms and facilities leaning across counters and whispering to bank tellers and caseworkers and doctors and neighbors, this isn't right. And being patted on the hand and dismissed and sent back to the people who were hurting them because the system believed the younger voice. And she wondered how many of them had notebooks. And she wondered how many of them had brass keys. And she wondered how many of them had found a table in a diner where someone pulled out a chair. And she knew the answer was not enough. The answer was never enough. Earl Buckner walked out of the courthouse and got into his truck and sat behind the wheel for 20 minutes without starting the engine. He was thinking about 17 years of walking past Harold's house. 17 years of the morning wave, coffee in hand. The reliable, comforting ritual of a man who believed that every day begins with a greeting and a cup in the acknowledgement that you exist and that your existence is noticed. And then the day the wave stopped. And Earl had knocked twice, and Travis had answered twice, and Earl had told himself it wasn't his business. He had told himself that for 18 months. And in those 18 months, Harold had been in a shed with a padlock and a bucket and 4 cans of soup. Earl started his truck. He drove to the hardware store. He bought a can of brass polish. He drove to Harold's house. He polished the mailbox. The name Pemberton gleamed in the late afternoon sun. It was a small thing, a thing that nobody would notice and nobody would comment on and nobody would remember. But it was the thing Earl could do. And doing something, even a small something, was better than sitting on a bench in a courthouse hallway, wondering how many times you had walked past a locked shed without knowing what was inside. Then witnesses, then the gallery row by row. Harold stayed in his seat, the 3rd row, Dorothy's row. He sat with his hands in his lap, his thumbs pressed together. Not from fear this time, not from cold, not from the habit of bracing himself against whatever came next. From relief, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that starts in the center of the chest and moves outward like warmth, loosening muscles you didn't know were clenched, releasing tension. You didn't know you were holding, filling spaces that had been hollow for so long, you had forgotten they were supposed to be full. He sat there until the courtroom was empty, until the lights were dimmed, until the bailiff came and asked if he was all right. "I'm fine, I just need another minute." The bailiff nodded and stepped back. Harold closed his eyes. He thought about Dorothy, about the way she used to squeeze his hand during the sermon, about the pot roast on Sundays, about the way she said his name, Harry, like it was something worth keeping. He opened his eyes. He stood. His knee ached, but it held. He walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway and through the courthouse doors and into the Tucson sun. And for the first time in 2 years, the warmth on his face felt like something he was allowed to have. The 6 weeks between the rescue and the trial had been a kind of second life, a life after life. Harold had spent the first 3 days in Tucson Medical Center being rehydrated and fed and tested and photographed and interviewed and cared for with a gentleness that made him flinch at first, because gentleness had been used as a weapon before and his body did not yet trust it. The nurses were kind, the doctors were thorough. The neurologist, Dr. Velasco, had spent 2 hours with him, administering tests that Harold completed with the quiet precision of a man who had been waiting 2 years for someone to ask him these questions. Because that was the cruelest part of what Travis had done. He had not just taken Harold's money and his freedom and his dignity, he had taken Harold's right to be assessed accurately. He had replaced the truth about Harold's mind with a lie, and the lie had become the official record, and the official record had become the justification for everything that followed. The neurological evaluation at TMC had demolished that lie with the thoroughness of a wrecking ball meeting a house of cards. 94th percentile. The number sat in Harold's chest like a small, warm stone. Not because the number surprised him. He had always known his mind was sharp. He had never doubted it. Not once, not for a single moment in the 2 years of captivity. The crosswords, the notebook, the load-bearing calculations he ran in his head for entertainment lying on the cot at night, designing imaginary bridges across imaginary rivers, calculating stress and tension and compression the way other people count sheep. His mind had never wavered. What wavered was the world's willingness to believe it. 94th percentile meant that Harold Pemberton's cognitive function was stronger than 94% of people his age. It meant that the man Travis had called confused was in fact one of the sharpest septuagenarians in the state of Arizona. It meant that the diagnosis Dr. Hargrove had written on her official letterhead was not just wrong, but spectacularly, provably, undeniably false. It meant that every document Travis had filed, every power of attorney he had obtained, every insurance form he had signed, every justification he had offered for the shed and the padlock and the bucket, all of it was built on a foundation of fabricated medical evidence. And when you remove the foundation, the building falls. That is not a metaphor. That is engineering. Harold had been released from TMC after 5 days. He went home. His home. The house was exactly as Travis had left it, which is to say it was clean and tidy and perfectly maintained on the surface because Travis understood that surfaces are what people judge you by. The lawn mowed, the dishes done, the floors swept. But Harold walked through the rooms and he could feel the absence of Dorothy in every corner and the presence of Travis in every lock, in every drawer, in every space where something had been removed and not returned. His identification was gone. His checkbook was gone. His phone was disconnected. His car keys were in Travis's desk drawer. The house was clean, the way a crime scene is clean after the perpetrator has wiped it down. The evidence of what had happened was not visible to the eye, but Harold could feel it, in the air, in the silence, in the particular emptiness of a house that has been lived in by a predator. Over the following weeks, the pieces of Harold's life were returned to him one by one. His driver's license, his social security card, his bank accounts frozen by court order and then unfrozen after Travis was removed as a signatory. His car, which Hank the mail carrier had helped him get running again, replacing the battery and inflating the tires and checking the fluids with the careful attention of a man who understood that this car was not just transportation. It was proof that Harold Pemberton could still turn a key and press a pedal and navigate from one place to another under his own power and by his own choice. The arthritis medication helped, not completely. The surgeon had said the knee would never fully heal, too much damage, too long without treatment, but the medication took the grinding down to a dull throb, and a dull throb was something Harold could work with. He had worked with worse. He had calculated load-bearing tolerances for bridges that spanned rivers and canyons and highways. A knee was nothing compared to a cantilever. He gained 14 pounds. He slept in a bed with clean sheets and a pillow and a blanket that covered his feet. He opened the kitchen window because Dorothy had said the house needed to breathe, and she was right about that, the same way she was right about most things. He made coffee every morning and carried it to the front porch and stood there in the early light and waved at Earl Buckner when the mail carrier walked past. And Earl waved back, every morning, without fail. Because some rituals matter more than the people performing them realize. 3 days after the verdict, Harold Pemberton did something he had not done in over 2 years. He drove. He sat behind the wheel of his own car, a 2014 Ford Taurus that had been parked in the garage since Travis took the keys. The battery had been replaced, the tires inflated, the registration renewed. His license reinstated after the cognitive evaluation proved what he had never stopped knowing, that his mind was his, had always been his, and no forged diagnosis could take it from him. He turned the key, the engine caught, his hands were on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way Dorothy had always teased him about. "You drive like you're taking a test, Harry." He could hear her voice, clear as the day she said it, 20 years ago, 30, yesterday. He pulled out of the driveway. His house, his mailbox with the name Pemberton on the side that Earl the mail carrier had polished without being asked the day Harold came home from the hospital. His front porch where he had stood every morning with coffee for 17 years, waving at a man who walked the same route every day. He had waved at Earl that morning, first time in 2 years. Earl had waved back and then turned away fast, but not fast enough. Harold saw him press his sleeve against his eyes. The drive to Rosie's Griddle took 18 minutes. He knew the route, had driven it 100 times before Travis, before the shed, before the padlock and the bucket and the 4 cans of soup that became the borders of his world. He parked in the same lot, stepped out, stood for a moment, let the sun hit his face, let the heat wrap around him the way Arizona heat does. Total, unforgiving, and strangely honest. The desert doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. The desert gives you exactly what it is and lets you decide what to do about it. Harold walked to the door, pushed it open with one hand, because one hand was enough now. The bell jingled. The waitress looked up. Same girl, blonde ponytail. She had been there the day Harold walked in with a limp and a shirt button wrong and asked 7 tables for a place to sit. She had watched every refusal. She had held the door for him when he left. She recognized him. Her face changed, not pity. She had looked at him with pity the first time. This was different. This was something closer to respect, something closer to awe. Because the man standing in the doorway was not the man who had limped through it 2 months ago. This man stood straight. His shirt was tucked in. His hair was trimmed. His eyes were calm. "Welcome back," she said. "Thank you." He looked toward the back corner, the table against the wall where the overhead light still had not been replaced. 2 months and nobody had changed that bulb. Maybe nobody ever would. Maybe that table was meant to sit in shadow. Maybe some things happened in the dark because that was the only place they could begin. Garrett was already there. Same chair, same worn leather vest with the patch that made people cross the street and lock their doors and look the other way. Same dark blonde hair pulled back and tied off. Same jaw that had been set wrong and never corrected. Same arms that stretched the sleeves of a black t-shirt. Same coffee. Black, no sugar. And across from him, the second chair was already pulled out, angled slightly, just enough so that a man with a bad right knee wouldn't have to twist to sit down. Harold felt something hit him in the chest. Not pain, not grief, something bigger than both. The chair was out. Garrett had pulled it out before Harold arrived, had angled it the same way. The same quiet act that had changed everything. Harold crossed the diner floor. His steps were steady. The limp was there. It would always be there. But it no longer owned him. He walked past the other tables, past the people eating their lunches and drinking their coffees and living their ordinary lives. None of them looked at him the way they had looked at him the first time. None of them turned away. He reached the table. He stood there for a moment, looking at the chair, looking at Garrett. Neither spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because the things that needed saying lived in a space that words couldn't quite reach. They lived in the space between 2 men sitting across from each other in a roadside diner. One who had asked a question nobody wanted to hear, and one who had answered it with a single word in a chair. Harold sat down, his knee cracked. An old sound, a familiar sound, but not a frightening one. Not anymore. "You look better," Garrett said. "I eat 3 meals a day now. Good. And I sleep in a bed. A real bed. With a pillow and a blanket that actually covers my feet." Garrett almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved a fraction of an inch. "That'll do it." Harold flagged the waitress. She came over fast. "Eggs," Harold said. "Scrambled, bacon, pancakes, toast, coffee, orange juice." She wrote it down. Then she looked at Garrett. "Same for you, just coffee." She left. Harold settled into his chair. He pressed his palms flat on the table. A habit. a reflex from 2 years of pressing his hands against surfaces to stop them from shaking. But they were not shaking now. 24 years, Harold said. Maximum on every count. Consecutive. The judge called it the most calculated case of elder abuse she'd seen in 17 years on the bench. Garrett nodded. He turned his coffee mug between his hands slowly, the way he always did. Hargrove got 7, reduced for cooperation. She's testifying against 2 others in the network. And Clarence Munn. Harold's voice changed, dropped lower, rougher, the way a voice drops when it's carrying something too heavy for the throat. They reclassified it. Homicide. The nephew was arrested in Flagstaff. Harold looked at his hands. Clarence was 83 years old. He survived Korea. He survived 40 years of marriage and the loss of his wife and the loneliness that came after. He survived everything a life can throw at a man. And he ducked it in a 24-degree weather because someone locked his door from the inside and walked away. Garrett set his mug down. If I hadn't gotten that latch open, Harold said, if I hadn't walked that mile and a half, if you hadn't been sitting at this table, but you did, and I was, I'd be Clarence. You're not Clarence. No, I'm not, because of you. Garrett shook his head. The motion was slow, deliberate, the way he did everything. No, because of you. You kept that notebook, Harold, every date, every amount, every word he said. You rented that storage unit, paid cash, hid money in a boot. You carved your name into a wall. You worked a latch with a butter knife for weeks. You walked a mile and a half on a knee that should have put you on the ground. You did all of that before I did anything. I just happened to be sitting here. You didn't just happen to be sitting here. Harold leaned forward. His voice was steady, firm. The voice of a man who had spent 33 years giving specifications that held up bridges. 7 people in this room looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the trouble. You looked at me and pulled out a chair. That's not happenstance. That's a choice. And that choice is the reason I'm alive. The food arrived. The waitress set the plate down in front of Harold. Eggs piled high, bacon crisp, pancakes stacked 3 deep, toast on the side, coffee steaming, orange juice in a tall glass. Harold looked at the plate. He did not check the door. He did not check the window. He did not scan the room for threats. He did not brace for the plate to be taken away. He picked up his fork and he ate. Real bites. Full bites. He buttered the pancakes and poured syrup on them and ate them in big, unashamed mouthfuls. He ate the bacon with his fingers. He drank the orange juice in 3 long pulls. He spread strawberry jam on the toast and bit into it and chewed with his eyes closed because it tasted like something he had forgotten he was allowed to enjoy. Garrett watched him eat, and this time, unlike the first time, there was no tightness in his chest. No anger, no urgency. Just a man watching another man eat breakfast in a diner. The most ordinary thing in the world, and somehow the most extraordinary. They talked about the wider investigation, about the 5 additional cases the Attorney General's office had opened, about the families being contacted, about the people who might still be saved because Harold had kept a notebook and Garrett had pulled out a chair. They talked about Dorothy. Harold told Garrett about the pot roast on Sundays, about the way she hummed in the kitchen, about the last thing she ever said to him. Don't forget to eat, Harry, said on a Tuesday night, casual, offhand. The kind of thing a wife says without thinking because she has said it 1,000 times before. She died in her sleep that night, and Harold never forgot those words. She'd have liked you, Harold said. I doubt that. She would have. Dorothy didn't care about patches or vests or what people looked like. She cared about what people did. And what you did, she would have looked at you and said, that's a good man, Harry. Make sure he comes for pot roast. Garrett turned his mug, didn't say anything, but something shifted in his face. Something softened, just barely, just enough. Harold finished every bite on his plate. He set the fork down, pressed his napkin against his mouth, sat by my head. I want to ask you something. Ask, why did you pull out of that chair? I've asked you before, and you gave me an answer, but I want the real one, not the short version, the one you think about when you're sitting in your shop at night. Garrett stopped turning the mug. He looked at Harold, held his gaze. You really want to know? I really want to know. Garrett was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower than Harold had ever heard it. Not a whisper, just close. My old man was 68 when he got sick. Lungs, 40 years of Marlboros. He moved in with my sister because he couldn't live alone anymore. Her husband didn't want him there. Didn't say it to his face. Said it in other ways. Moved him to the back bedroom. Stopped cooking for him. Stopped talking to him. My old man called me twice. First time he said he was fine. Second time he didn't say anything. Just breathed. I could hear him breathing on the line, and I knew he was trying to tell me something, but the words wouldn't come because he'd been alone so long, he'd forgotten how to ask for help. Garrett stopped, picked up the mug, set it down without drinking. I drove 6 hours, got there at midnight, found him in the back bedroom. Thin, hadn't eaten in days. His clothes were dirty. He looked at me, and the first thing he said was, "I didn't want to bother anyone." Harold's eyes were wet. Garrett stopped talking. He looked at the table, at the coffee mug that he had been turning between his hands for the last 10 minutes, at the surface of the coffee, which had gone cold and still and reflected the ceiling light like a small, dark mirror. He had never told anyone that story, not the full version, not with the details, not with the midnight drive and the back bedroom and the dirty clothes and the words his father had said. I didn't want to bother anyone. 6 words that had lived in Garrett's chest for 12 years, like a piece of shrapnel that the surgeons had decided was too close to the heart to remove, too dangerous to extract. So they left it there, and Garrett carried it, the way he carried everything, silently, heavily, with the understanding that some weights are not meant to be set down but only shifted from one shoulder to the other when the aching gets too bad. His father's name was Dale Slade, a welder by trade, a man who could join 2 pieces of metal so smoothly that the seam was invisible. Who could look at a broken exhaust manifold and see not just what was wrong, but how it had gone wrong and what forces had conspired to break it and how to fix it so that it would not break again. A man of precision and silence and the kind of competence that doesn't announce itself but simply does the work and moves on. Dale had smoked Marlboro Reds since he was 16 years old. The first cigarette at dawn, the last one at midnight, the in-between ones uncounted and uncountable, an unbroken chain of smoke and fire that stretched across 4 decades like a fuse burning toward an inevitable conclusion. The conclusion came at 68, lung cancer, stage 4 by the time anyone thought to check. Because Dale Slade was the kind of man who did not go to doctors, who did not complain about the cough that got worse every winter, who did not mention the blood on the handkerchief that he folded and put back in his pocket because showing weakness was not something Dale Slade's vocabulary included. He moved in with Garrett's sister because the house in Prescott had stairs, and the stairs had become mountains, and the mountains had become impossible. The sister's husband, a man named Phil, who sold insurance and played golf on Saturdays, and had opinions about everything and expertise in nothing, did not want Dale there. Did not say it with words because Phil was the kind of man who communicated through omissions rather than statements. He omitted Dale from dinner conversations, omitted Dale from weekend plans, omitted the back bedroom from the cleaning schedule so that the dust gathered and the sheets went unchanged, and the window stayed closed until the room smelled like sickness and neglect in the particular stale air of a space that has been sealed shut and forgotten. Dale called Garrett twice. The first call lasted 4 minutes. Dale said he was fine, said the room was comfortable, said Phil and Karen were taking good care of him. Garrett heard the lies the way Harold heard the lies of the 7 tables. Clearly, precisely, with the mathematical certainty of a man who has spent his life reading the truth behind surfaces. But Garrett was in Tucson, 6 hours away, and Dale was saying he was fine. And sometimes the distance between knowing someone is lying and proving it is an ocean that you cannot cross without getting wet. The second call came 3 weeks later. Dale did not speak. He just breathed. Garrett held the phone and listened to his father breathe, and he could hear in those breaths everything that words could not carry. The loneliness, the confusion, the slow erosion of dignity that happens when you are dependent on people who resent your dependence. The shame of needing help from people who do not want to give it. And underneath all of that, the thing that Garrett would never forgive himself for not hearing sooner. The asking, the silent, desperate, wordless asking of a man who had never learned how to ask for help, because asking meant admitting weakness, and weakness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant danger. And danger was something Dale Slade had spent his entire life building walls against. Garrett drove 6 hours, arrived at midnight, found his father in the back bedroom, thin, unshaved, clothes unchanged for days, the window closed, the air stale, a plate of food on the nightstand that had been there long enough to grow mold. Dale looked at him from the bed with eyes that were too large for his face because the face had shrunk around them, the flesh melting away as the cancer consumed him from the inside out. And the first thing he said was, "I didn't want to bother anyone." Garrett had stood in that doorway for a long time, looking at his father, looking at the room, looking at the plate of food with the mold growing on it like a small green accusation. And he had felt something build inside him that was not anger, and was not grief, and was not the desire for violence, though all three of those things were present and accounted for. What he felt was something larger, something that encompassed anger and grief and violence and went beyond them into a territory that doesn't have a name, but lives in the chest like a fire that doesn't burn, but illuminates. The territory of understanding. The understanding that the worst thing in this world is not cruelty. Cruelty at least acknowledges the existence of its victim. Cruelty says, "I see you and I choose to hurt you." Cruelty, however terrible, is a form of attention. Indifference is worse. Indifference says, "I do not see you. I do not acknowledge you. You do not exist in my field of concern. You are not worth the energy it would take to be cruel to you. You are nothing." And a man who is nothing will die like nothing, quietly, in a back bedroom, with a plate of moldy food and a closed window, and the last words on his lips being an apology for existing. I didn't want to bother anyone. Dale died 4 months later at the VA hospital in Phoenix. Garrett was holding his hand. The room was quiet except for the machines and the air conditioning and the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Dale's breathing had been getting shallower for hours, each breath a little less than the last, like a tide going out. And in the last minute, when the breaths came so far apart that each one seemed like it might be the final one, Dale opened his eyes. They were clear, focused, present. The eyes of a welder who could see the seam. The eyes of a man who could look at something broken and understand exactly how it broke. "I wish I'd asked sooner," Dale said. And then the breathing stopped, and the machines changed their tone. And Garrett sat in the chair beside the bed and held his father's hand and did not let go for a long time. He died 4 months later in a VA hospital. I was holding his hand, and the last thing he said to me was, "I wish I'd asked sooner." Garrett looked at the table, at his hands, at the mug. "When you walked across this diner, Harold, I saw my old man. I saw a man who needed somewhere to sit and was running out of people to ask. And I thought about what would have happened if someone had pulled out a chair for my father. If someone had looked at him, really looked at him and said, 'You can sit here. You are welcome here. You are not a burden.' He looked up. That's why. Because you asked. Because you needed a chair. Because I had one. And because my old man taught me that the worst thing in this world isn't cruelty. It's indifference. It's a room full of people who see a man struggling and decide it's not their problem." Harold reached across the table. He put his hand on Garrett's forearm. Not a handshake, not a pat, a grip, firm, steady. The grip of a man who had spent 33 years building things that held. "Your father raised a good man." Garrett didn't respond, but he didn't pull his arm away. They sat like that for a moment. Two men in a roadside diner, 174, 145. One who had survived a locked shed and a stolen life and walked a mile and a half on a broken knee to ask a question nobody wanted to hear. One who had answered it because his father died wishing someone had done the same. Harold stood. He reached for his wallet. "Don't," Garrett said. "You bought me breakfast last time." "That breakfast saved my life," Harold said. "This one's mine." Garrett looked at him, then nodded. Harold paid at the counter, left a 30% tip. The waitress thanked him by name. He smiled at her, a real smile, the kind that comes from a place that has been replenished. He walked back to Garrett's table, stood there. Same time next week, Garrett leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. And for the first time since Harold Pemberton had known him, Garrett Slade smiled. Not a half smile, not a twitch. A real one, full, unhurried, the kind of smile that changes a face completely. "Chair'll be out." Harold nodded. He turned, walked across the diner floor, Past the tables, past the counter, past the waitress. His limp was there, would always be there. But his hands were at his side, steady. His back was straight, his head was up. He pushed through the glass door. The bell jingled. The Arizona sun hit his face. And for the first time, Harold Pemberton did not look behind him. He drove home, his home, parked in his driveway, walked to his front door, reached into his pocket and pulled out his key. His key, not borrowed, not stolen back, not hidden inside a boot. His. And he unlocked his own door and walked into his own kitchen and sat down at his own table. No padlock, no bucket, no 4 cans of soup, no plywood on the windows, no butter knife hidden under a mattress. He sat at the table where Dorothy used to set the pot roast on Sundays, where they had paid bills together since 1971, where he had drunk coffee every morning for decades before a grandson with a smile and a law and a padlock had tried to erase him from his own life. Harold folded his hands on the table, pressed his thumbs together, closed his eyes. He thought about Clarence Munn, 83 years old, dying in 24-degree weather behind a locked door because nobody pulled out a chair. He thought about the 6 other victims, the ones still being found, the ones whose stories were just now being heard because Harold's story had cracked the silence wide open. He thought about Patty at the bank who had tried, about Earl who had noticed, about Sheila who had remembered, about the people who had seen something wrong and tried to act and been defeated by a system that believed the younger voice. He thought about a notebook with a blue cover, about the words on the first page. If anything happens to me, this is why. He had written those words expecting to die. He had written them as evidence for an investigation into his own death, and instead they had become the evidence that saved his life. He thought about a diner, a glass door, a bell, 7 tables, 7 refusals, and one man in a dark corner who had stood up and pulled out a chair because his own father had died, wishing someone had done the same. Harold opened his eyes. He looked at the kitchen around him, at the window where the light came through, at the door that had no lock on the outside, at the life that had been given back to him by a brass key and a spiral notebook and a stranger who said one word: sit. Because the difference between a man disappearing and a man surviving was never about strength. It was never about power. It was never about the system or the law or the people who were supposed to protect you and didn't. It was about one moment, one question, one ordinary act of decency in an ordinary diner on an ordinary afternoon. Mind if I join you in someone choosing to say yes?